All right, welcome back to the House Environment and Transportation Committee, Thursday, January 30th. Bill hearings. We're going to start with HB 532, Chair Barnes, Local Government, Municipal Annexation, Petition and Referendum. Go quick before they all get back. We had a fiscal briefing, so they might have some questions for you.
I can't speak the budget, Mr. Chair. Where I go, just follow me around. I have an ad hoc panel. Is that okay? Thank you, sir. So this should be really brief, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair. Great to be with you. Just to set a little context on this. Essentially, there's a property economic development in Prince George's County that the state has considerable amount of money in. We wanted to make sure the chair of the capital budget on the Senate side and I that state investment was protected. So that's what this bill was about. Because if annexation happened on this property, it really was putting the economic development opportunity in jeopardy. So this was never about one municipality or another. And who annexes it and who doesn't. This was always about, for the Senate Chair of Capital Budget, who is from Montgomery County, and me protecting our state investment. After talking to the local delegation, the senators and delegates, we did come to understand that maybe Bladensburg, one of the municipalities, hadn't been as much as part of the process as they otherwise could be. Thought that that was a fair assessment, so we did meet with the mayor. The mayor did reiterate that fact. And we took that to heart and did reach out to the developer and others who have pledged that they will be a better part and bigger part of that process. I think that's given the mayor and council a lot of peace of mind. I also think that the senator for the 47th district, as well as Julian Ivey, who is on the budget committee, have pledged for an independent economic study for Bladensburg itself, right? Through Medco, our state agency, and we will be putting $200,000 in the budget for that. With that, I think that Bladensburg has seen that this is sort of a fair resolution of this and intends to de-annex this property, meaning that there's no longer a threat to our state investment. With that, as soon as that de-annexation happens, Mr. Chair, I intend to send a letter to this committee to withdraw this bill. So it won't be something you'll need to vote on. We do have someone here from the city of Bladensburg who is just going to kind of reiterate their intent of de-annexation. That would probably take about 30 seconds of your time if you'd be willing to hear from him, Mr. Chair.
John O'Connor, I'm here on behalf of Mayor Keisha James, Town of Bladensburg, and the council. As the delegate had said, the Town of Bladensburg wishes to be solid partners in this, not only for Prince George's County, the Town of Cheverly, but the state of Maryland based on the comprehensive investment that has already been made. Our attorneys are currently in court, and it has been conveyed to Prince George's County and the Town of Cheverly that we are willing to accept a TRO, 15 to 30 days, to let this cool off and de-annex. That has been proffered to them. Based on that, we're going to use that time to go ahead and find a mutually agreeable outcome between all parties as promised. And I'm here to put that on the record before this committee, Delegate Barnes, on behalf of the mayor.
So I think with that, Mr. Chair, we really have a win for Cheverly, for Bladensburg, for Prince George's County, but also, from my perspective, for the state of Maryland in protecting our investment. That's all we have.
Great. Glad you guys worked it out. Any questions on this thing that's already been worked out? Delegate Healy.
I want to say thank you for working it out. And also, we just had our fiscal briefing, and I have great admiration and rely on you to fix everything so that it works for everybody.
I was hoping to avoid the budget. I was going to come up here, Jay Jacobs talk about critical areas and Chesapeake Bay. Instead, you brought me budget, so.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That concludes the bill hearing, House Bill 532. We'll now turn to House Bill 80. Land use transit-oriented development alterations. I think there's probably a panel from the Department of Transportation. You may begin when you are ready.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Joe McAndrew, Assistant Secretary for Project Development and Delivery at the Maryland Department of Transportation. With me today to support with any questions is David Zayden, Chief of Real Estate and Transit-Oriented Development at MDOT. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak in support of House Bill 80. We collectively, both the executive and legislative branches, have invested substantial resources in our transit system statewide, and over many years advocated for transit-supported developments. We know that those systems work best when destinations, whether housing, government, facilities, retail, employment, or essential services, are easily accessed by walking or rolling adjacent to our transit stops. We know that we generate more revenue as well as help the state meet its housing and climate goals when there is a hub of mixed-use development and activity around these stations. The opportunity that transit-oriented development presents the state and its residents is immense. Development just around MDOT-owned transit-adjacent land in the Baltimore core service area and along the Mark Penn Line corridor could result in over 6,000 new housing units and more than $1.6 billion in additional state and local tax revenue. Additionally, building transit-oriented development around WMATA's Maryland Metro Rail stations would yield close to 18,000 housing units and almost $2.8 billion in state and local tax revenue. This does not begin to account for the transit-oriented development on privately owned land that we think will be catalyzed by MDOT and WMATA development efforts, something we want to support through this legislation. What's important to note is that transit-oriented development doesn't happen overnight. Successful transit-oriented development projects take time and dedicated effort between public and private partners to realize the full extent. As an example, the New Carrollton transit-oriented development effort was initiated by WMATA in 2010. We are just now seeing the full fruits of that labor. House Bill 80 won't provoke development overnight, but lays the foundation for enabling transit-oriented development well into the future. The purpose of this legislation is to address the barriers that stand in the way of more projects happening throughout the state and support efforts to create shared plans for station areas. It seeks to address barriers in zoning, implementation, and funding and financing while expanding project eligibility for MDOT's TOD fund to include planning activities. Specifically on zoning, House Bill 80 eliminates minimum parking requirements near transit stations and establishes mixed-use development by right near rail transit stations. Further, it exempts state land at transit stations from local zoning, provided that the department develop a master development plan for the land. These measures leverage the state's existing multi-billion-dollar investment in transit to create development that supports housing and inclusive economic growth. MDOT has worked and will continue to work closely with local jurisdictions to retain local involvement in the development of plans for transit sites. What's important also on the parking, removal of the parking minimums is that we expect that parking would continue to be built at developments, but what it would be moving forward is more context sensitive to each development and be market driven. So parking would still exist and still be expected as part of the development. On implementation, HB 80 clarifies that TODs are exempt from state procurement law, conforming to existing practice and resolving an ambiguity that has resulted in delays and legal challenges for critical TOD projects such as State Center. To be clear, MDOT's TOD joint developments have and will continue to be approved by the BPW. On funding and financing, House Bill 80 would allow local jurisdictions to pool together special taxing districts to support the funding and financing of corridor-level transit-oriented development initiatives. Doing so would create more attractive investment opportunities and leverage multiple investments along transit corridors like the Mark Penn Line or Baltimore Metro. The legislation also amends the Transit-Oriented Development Capital Grant and Loan Fund created by the legislature in 2023 in order to support early stage planning efforts and financing of TOD projects. Two key elements needed to support the creation of shared visions and implementation plans. Taken together, we believe that these measures would allow more stations to successfully redevelop, generating new tax revenue for local communities, new riders and fares for our transit system, economic growth for our state, reduce climate emissions from the transportation system, and grow our housing stock. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to answering any questions that you may have.
Great, and I apologize, I was not in the room, so are you the only one testifying on this?
Correct. This is Dave Zayden. He's here to help answer any questions that you may have.
Terrific. Delegate Terrassa.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you just tell me again where this would be applicable? So, for example, I represent Howard County. Would this apply in Howard County as well?
It would apply to any rail station area, 0.5 miles away from a rail station.
I guess because there's a lot of areas of the state that have good transportation, and I don't think I'm telling anything out of place to say that Howard County does not have a good transportation system. How would these folks be able to access like doctor's appointments, after-school activities, any of those things if the parking is reduced?
Again, parking would probably still exist at some level, and maybe even more than what is currently at a parking minimum level. What it ultimately is doing is making sure that it's, context-driven and contextual to the market forces that are there. Developers are self-interested to build parking as much as they deem as necessary. And so I think, what oftentimes is the challenge on parking is that it is a cost borne by various stakeholders, whether it be us, the state. We're working with Anne Arundel County right now to build a parking facility at Odenton, or the private side. And so if you have parking minimums, sometimes you might overbuild. That comes at the cost to the development, whether it be public or private. It also comes at the cost of maybe lost opportunity, whether it be a public amenity like a green space or a housing unit. And so I think at the end of the day, it's trying to free up the ability to be more creative with the development opportunity.
So I guess I'm wondering if there's planned funding to do sort of that transportation that some of those folks who are living where there's minimal parking, so they can get to like your basics, like your doctor, especially if there's going to be any affordable housing in these, like how will they get to doctor's appointments, jobs? Is there additional funding for that type of activity?
So this bill would just address kind of transit-oriented development components. We also oversee the Capital Transportation Program, or Consolidated Transportation Program. And in that, we allocate roughly $21 billion if our budget's approved this year. That includes things like MTA's service, lot service, as well as direct HUR investments to counties. So I think, taken in its entirety, I think there's opportunities, but this bill in specific just addresses kind of transit-oriented development components.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for this. Obviously, transit-oriented development is incredibly important, and I really appreciate that. I did have a question about your statement about exempting procurement regulations. Does that include minority, women, and business-owned requirements?
No, we would still be, required, and under this administration, it's the main goal of the work that we do. I think, and I might ask Dave to articulate a bit more here, but it would ultimately define that we are exempt from typical procurements of purchasing paper or what have you, and it's much more of a, competitive sealed bid type process. But
yeah. That's correct, and it would basically codify existing practice where we put development solicitations out for bid, and we follow all of the state goals related to the issues that you mentioned, and then the ultimate agreement with the development partner goes before the Board of Public Works. So that's existing practice. It's just not clearly codified in law, which has presented some legal challenges in the past, and we wanted to make sure that we were on better legal footing in that respect.
That makes sense. Thank you. And what about labor practices, whether it's prevailing wage or project labor agreements? Is that there's nothing threatening any of that in this?
Nothing threatening it, and we would expect to follow the governor's executive order.
Thank you.
Delegate Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. Always good to see you. I really like trans-oriented development, and I like how we're heading. I like the goal of this bill, but I've also realized last few years as we're looking at development, and especially trans-oriented development, it's easier or harder depending on how we're dealing with the municipality or county in question. So have you guys spoken with the counties? Have you spoken to any counties in particular? Talked to them about whether they'd be on board, to what degree they would be on board or not on board, or what the kind of on-the-ground impact will look like for them?
Yeah, so we have and continue on a regular basis to engage the counties, whether it be Baltimore County, Baltimore City, Howard, Anne Arundel, Prince George's, Montgomery, Frederick, being maybe some of the larger counties that have opportunity within this bill. And I would say that the discussions that we have to date are strong. And at the end of the day, what's really important to note is, again, back to the point, transit-oriented development will not happen tomorrow just because this bill passes, right? It takes committed partnerships between state, local, and private sector partners if we're going to be able to see development happen near our transit stations. So we would continue to uphold that because at the end of the day, that's the only way we're going to see success here.
Absolutely, because I know it's, again, it could be difficult depending on who you're dealing with and where you're talking. So yeah, I definitely encourage you guys to keep the counties and municipalities in the discussions. Thank you.
Yep.
Delegate Stein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you go back to the issue of what the bill does to prohibit an off-street parking requirement within a half a mile of a rail station? Could you explain a little bit more how, based on your experience, this has been a problem in developing TODs and how precluding that would advance more TODs? Because I guess I'm still not clear about the connection.
Sure. So as Assistant Secretary McAndrew described, it would not eliminate parking in general at sites. It would just eliminate the requirement for a minimum threshold of parking, and would basically look to have the development and the market kind of drive how much parking is provided. One of the things that we're trying to kind of solve for is an over requirement of parking that would not only make the development more expensive, but would also not support that shift of trips from cars to transit, because that's the whole goal of transit-oriented development. We think there are jurisdictions that do this well. We just want to make sure that there's not an opportunity to over-prescribe parking, which would then limit the impacts of TOD, and that's what we're trying to solve for here.
Mr. Chair, if I could just follow up. Are you finding that counties that might be resistant, that might be hesitant for TODs are doing that, are over-prescribing, over-requiring parking within half a mile? Again, I'm just trying to figure out what's the nexus. Why is this proven to be a problem?
So it's a cost, right? It's a cost borne by somebody. If you have a minimum threshold requirement for parking, it's not uncommon that you have, it's a one-size-fits-all recipe for whether it be a grocery store, whether it be a doctor's appointment, you need to have X amount of parking spaces by square footage oftentimes. And so what you end up having is an overbuild of parking for that one time a year that you might need it. Thanksgiving, Black Friday, if you're a shopping center or a grocery store, for example. And so that comes at a real cost, not just to the developer, but also to, say, a doctor. These parking structures, structured parking facilities, it's about $50,000 per year for one spot. And that, we as consumers don't necessarily see that because we assume it's going to be free. But somebody needs to pay for that parking spot, and that's, foregone ability to redevelop in different ways. Now, of course, we are, let's be honest with ourselves, we are in a predominant parking society. And so if you remove the need to have a one-size-fits-all prescription for parking and ultimately allow the market to drive the determination in partnership with the state and the local government, you then get something that might be a little bit more well-suited and limit the overbuild and the excessive costs that may be associated with that as well.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Let's stick with our Baltimore County crew here. Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Gentlemen, good afternoon. I have one line in here that's particularly concerning to me, so I'm going to read it, and I want to get your take on what this line exactly means. So it says here in the bill, a legislative body may not take any action to preclude mixed-use development that is located within 0.5 miles of a rail transit station. So what does that mean to you in real terms?
So the main focus of that is land use and zoning. Mm-hmm. So we want to kind of lay out there that in order for there to be productive transit-oriented development and a transit-oriented development that can really drive ridership and do the things that it needs to do, it needs to be of a mix of uses. Mm-hmm. So the language there, what we're looking to do is have that apply specifically to zoning. Mm-hmm. And whether that may be enacting a zoning classification or a plan unit development type situation. So that's the main focus of the legislation.
So are there any limits to that? Any limits on what the county could do? And I have an example that I'm going to provide here. So are there any limits to where the county could actually exert, or whoever the zoning body is, in this case I'm talking about the county, could be a local government, whatever, could exert some sort of limitation in that 0.5 mile radius there?
As drafted, no, but ultimately we need to work through kind of the regulatory framework to kind because not all stations are created equal.
That's right.
So there's an opportunity within that framework to be thinking about, ultimately how to prescribe that type of condition.
Sure. So for me, that's a major problem. I have a rail station in my district. It's a MARC train station. That within 0.5 miles of there is a nuclear waste dump, literally, right? So I think that is an overly broad kind of language there. I mean, the county would have a very realistic reason to say we should not be putting people's homes on top of or near where there's nuclear material. So I think that language is overly broad, and we definitely need to tune that up there quite a bit.
Yep.
Delegate Guyton, Baltimore County.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And I was actually going to point to the same parts of the legislation as my colleague Delegate Naraki. Here we go again, thinking alike. Because we've been talking a lot about this bill changing parking requirements, but kind of skipped over this little part that talked about legislative body may not do anything to preclude mixed-use development for either the rail station area or for state-owned lands. So my question for you has to do with the work. We did a lot of work last year on House Bill 538. Does this wipe out the amendments on that bill and put it back into its original framework?
I'm not tracking that.
Okay, I'm sorry. So last year we had House Bill 538, which did not allow any sort of county AFPO provisions, anything like that, to come into to preclude mixed-use development located within 0.5 miles, to do exactly what these two lines say, right? We put a bunch of amendments on that bill so that in fact, they could, under certain situations, do that. It looks like this bill actually wipes all of that work out. Am I accurate?
So this bill would only target zoning. It would not address anything with, adequate public facility ordinances or other types of provisions that counties have today and would continue to have.
And I'm so sorry, Mr. Chair. I think I'm confused about that distinction. If you're talking about zoning, can you say a little bit more about precluding it with zoning versus precluding it? I mean, because the zoning decisions are coming about in pretty much the same way as in my understanding. They're really sort of one and the same, at least in our county, it seems like. So can you say a little more about that?
Yeah, I mean, so they are technically separate, but oftentimes get conflated or brought forward at the same time. And so what we would be addressing with this bill is zoning provisions. Counties would still be able to have adequate public facility ordinance expectations and enabled by, if this law were to pass as drafted.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a little confused about the differences and why that piece is in this bill if we're talking about parking surfaces. It doesn't. Anyway, I would like some follow-up on that. Thank you.
Follow-up.
Do any more Baltimore County members wish to? Delegate Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would like to return to the issue of TODs being exempt from state procurement. So I wanted to understand, you gave the example of like goods, and then Delegate Ruth asked about PLAs and that kind of thing. What I wanted to focus in on is this exemption in, say, a mixed-use case where there are state projects involved or other government projects. I think of the New Carrollton Metro Station where DHCD is located. Would this also exempt public projects from our government procurement laws? Because I would find that problematic. Are you only trying to exempt private investments at TODs?
So I think there are probably some nuances there, but in general, what this is talking about is the selection and development of an agreement with a private sector partner to build mixed-use development.
But is that explicit enough in the bill? And if it's not, that is something I would want to see.
I apologize. I didn't hear that question.
I'm saying, is that clearly stated that it's private only? Because I think you started answering by saying there are some nuances. I would not want personally to see nuances around publicly funded pieces in mixed development projects. And I'm not, not really crazy about the private piece either, but I'm asking specifically about a public investment around in transit-oriented development, because we have those.
So a model example, just to give you a sense, is that because this wasn't clearly articulated in the process or in code, when state sitter was proposed previously in the mid-2000s, those that brought suit against it were able to make this a legally questionable argument, which ultimately held up the advancement of that development. Ultimately, the court cited that the state of Maryland, does not need to conform to the procurement title of state code, and we can get more information to everybody on this. But ultimately, we at MDOT have been following a procurement section or a process, and this would ultimately clarify that to limit legal risk and exposure. Because when we're doing development deals such as this, you're trying to limit risk and exposure and create more certainty, because there's a lot of risk and exposure in any development deal such as this, cost, time, et cetera, and so you're trying to limit. It's not necessarily taking away the ability for the public sector to be achieving goals or outcomes, and ultimately still would receive approval, as we currently do through BPW for.
Okay, well, I appreciate all that, but I think a follow-up in writing with more detail. I don't know the case to which you're referring, but like Delegate Ruth, I'm concerned about prevailing wage, PLAs, and that kind of thing, specifically for public parts of these mixed-use developments. And thank you.
Certainly.
Thank you. I'll look forward to the follow-up.
Yep.
Delegate Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Assistant Secretary. Thank you for your panel. Interesting bill, important policy advance, but lots of questions here in this room because my colleagues are all really smart. I'm going to hone in on a simple question, I think, and that has to do with the provision about state-owned land. And I realize you referred just now to State Center, which was possibly the greatest squandering, reckless squandering of community development and initiative in our lifetimes by the previous administration. And I think this bill could get us closer to getting back what was taken from us. But with regard to state-owned land, you mentioned here, it's mentioned in the bill rather, that a legislative body may not impose local zoning restrictions if the land is subject to a transit-oriented development plan approved by the Department of Transportation. I'm wondering about that TOD plan and the chronology during which that TOD plan is created. Does it exist before, after, at what point? For example, what's an example? I don't know, any state-owned land. Say there's a light rail station near Loch Raven hiking trail where I go hiking every year on New Year's Day. And it's not the best, but it's, it's decent. And that park is, I guess, state-owned. And so, but to my knowledge, there's no TOD plan there. So does that mean, what does that mean for, what are the implications?
It's a good question.
Of this bill?
So the intent here, and I think we'll naturally need to further articulate through amendment how we would regulate and set requirements for said planning process. But when you're doing a planning process, you're doing public engagement and incorporation. And an example is the process that Dave and his team have led for Reisterstown Plaza Station in partnership with the development team that was selected prior to this administration coming on board, but went through kind of a public process, public engagement process. There's ultimate approval for that is with the city in terms of how that advances at that juncture. That's an example where we own many acres of land. The state owns many acres of land. Fortunately, if you want to look at it in the positive side, the state owns many acres of land around many of our stations. And they currently sit there as surface parking lots today. And so the question becomes, what are our goals and our values, and how do we unlock those parcels so that we can create the outcomes that I think that this committee is after: housing, reducing climate impacts from our transportation system, et cetera. If not, if we can't redevelop those parcels, we'll start to look at other avenues to put them into productive use of different opportunities. I think that would be a missed opportunity.
And I have one quick follow-up, if I may, Mr. Chair. If I heard right, you shared, Mr. Assistant Secretary, you shared a statistic about the number of new units, the potential number of new units that could be created when if this bill were to be passed and unleash growth opportunities. You said potentially 6,000 new housing units. Is that statewide?
That's in the Baltimore core and the Penn line corridors. That's not inclusive of the Brunswick or the Camden line. Our colleagues at WMATA, who will come up and support here shortly, we have worked with them. They think that there's 18,000 housing units that could be developed near the stations in the state of Maryland. And so, we're trying to do our part to produce housing, drive ridership, drive economic growth, reduce our climate impacts.
I'd love to have 6,000 new neighbors in my jurisdiction. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep.
Delegate Foley.
Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation. Going back to these two, this Section E and Section F that we've been discussing here, I do note that in Section E, the language says a legislative body may not take an action to preclude mixed-use development, et cetera. But in Section F, it talks about a legislative body may not impose local zoning restrictions. Can you tell me what would be included in may not take an action to preclude mixed-use development versus may not impose a local zoning restriction?
Right, so the first piece would be kind of agnostic to land ownership. So it would be saying that a local jurisdiction cannot enact, a legislative body cannot enact zoning regulations which would preclude mixed-use development regardless of who owns the parcel or who's developing it in that prescribed area. The state-owned land piece is related to the land that MDOT owns, its sites adjacent to transit. Well, we're saying that we need to be able to unlock those parcels for development. So as opposed to zoning being applied to them, we would create a development plan that would drive that development. Yeah. So that's kind of the core differences.
Yeah. I don't think, with all due respect, I don't think that answers my question. My question is that, and this kind of goes back to what Delegate Guyton was asking about and what Delegate Naraki was asking about, which is that the broad language in E is a local legislative body may not take an action to preclude mixed-use development. The next provision in Section F says that for state-owned land, a legislative body may not impose local zoning restrictions. And what I'm saying is, what's the difference between the broad language and the specific language in F? Like, what are the other actions that are contemplated there?
So let me try, and I think ultimately, it would be beneficial for us to come and meet with you to walk through kind of the intent and ultimately address some of the items here. But one, the state owns hundreds of acres of property adjacent to our stations today. Subsection F is looking at saying we would like to redevelop those if given the ability. And what we're looking to do is say we would work in partnership with the county and the local communities, but ultimately we would work to develop a zoning, not all that different, say, than a plan use development, but ultimately would not be restricted by local zoning efforts. That is for state-owned land. For all land within 0.5 miles, subsection E, it's saying that it should be mixed-use zoning. You could have overlays of different types of zonings. You could have different types of restrictions within that. The good delegate to my left here has raised a good point, right? Not all stations are created equal. Some of our stations are right next to an interstate. Some of our stations are right next to a school. We're not going to be redeveloping for certain types of uses like that. So I think there are opportunities as we continue to work with you and the rest of the committee to try to sharpen this one.
Okay.
You're raising good points.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Delegate Terrassa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So how does this work with affordable housing requirements? That are often in the zoning code.
Right, and so I think what we would be looking to do, and we've, under Secretary Day's leadership, been working closely with DHCD in all of our work, including right now we have an active RFQ, soon to become an RFP for Odenton's redevelopment of state-owned land there. We'd be looking to partner with DHCD and the ultimate developer through that development process to achieve goals that we share, the local partners as well. We're working in this instance with Anne Arundel County. It is our aim and objective that these would be successful, thriving mixed-use developments and mixed-income development opportunities so that it is inclusive and it's not, luxury and exclusive types of developments. And I think each one of those developments take different contexts. They have different market conditions. A development in the Washington, D.C. metro area might require less public subsidy to ultimately pencil, where in the Baltimore metro area, market conditions are such that we will need to partner with DHCD, bring more public resource if we're going to ultimately realize the opportunity that we're after here.
Okay, just to clarify, this would override a local jurisdiction's zoning requirement for more affordable housing?
No, we don't have a statewide, from MDOT's perspective, point of view on how much affordable housing should be in TODs. We think it's important, so we work with the local jurisdictions to determine that. So for instance, in the example that Joe just mentioned, Anne Arundel County recently enacted affordable housing requirements in their code, and our project at Odenton will still meet those. So it does not override their local.
No, and I applaud that. I think that's great to be meeting those, but I don't understand if it says that the zoning code basically is overridden. I understand your intent to put more affordable, and I completely applaud that. It seems like from the language here, it would override those requirements.
We'll if it's all right, we'll look into this and follow up.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
Delegate Healy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I wanted to explore this a little bit because I'm not clear about what the impact of this is. For a state-owned property, I'm going to say, from the perspective of where my district is, the biggest piece of state-owned property is the University of Maryland campus, right? And there are numerous metro stations and Purple Line stations that are all around that area. So does this mean that local zoning would not apply within a half a mile of the University of Maryland campus in all directions?
So Drew Morrison, also from the Secretary's office, involved in the drafting here, so forgive any ambiguities. In F, the language is state-owned land in use for a transportation purpose. And so the intent is for state-owned land that we own today that is used for parking lots, for rail facilities, things like that, that already today are being used for transportation and transportation-related activities, not other state-owned land that has other uses today.
Well, what if it is a piece of property on the campus, for example, that is undeveloped, that's trees and, possibly forest land, depending on how big the area is, but it's right across the street from a metro station, and the university wants to put up housing for graduate students or student body members, and they want to put a very dense there, and the neighborhood is surrounded by single-family homes right now. There's going to be a little back and forth. If the local government does zoning there, they're sensitive to all of that. But this area would be exempt from local zoning altogether. Is that right?
So it would not be exempt from local zoning altogether. With the provision in E, the idea is that there would not be able to prevent mixed-use development on that site. Would there still be the opportunity for forest conservation easements, for water and sewer policies, for other areas of development review that inform, ultimately how the site is configured and developed? Yes. I think our sort of fundamental concern is making sure that mixed-use development happens near transit because that supports transit. It does not override outside of the state properties other sorts of local development review activities that happen today.
So it's only on the state property. It's not within a half a mile of the state property.
The idea is to have a different approach as we move our way out. When we're talking about the state-owned land in use for transportation today, so not the University of Maryland, but a parking lot at a rail facility, that's where we have the place where we're saying we're exempt from local zoning regulations so that we can put forward a master plan that best supports the transit-oriented development activities. As we look at that next rung out, we're saying the real one threshold that we want to see is we don't want to have overparked facilities that compete with transit, and we don't want to have a uniform set of uses that don't support that type of all-day activity that mixed use provides to support transit.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate that. And we see some of that happening already in Prince George's County around some of the metros. The Hyattsville Crossing area, there's apartment buildings going up right now. So, yes.
Great. Last question, Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for a second bite. I appreciate it. My colleague Delegate Foley raised a point that I wanted to kind of just go a little bit further down about the subsection F there, talking about state-owned land and what restrictions could be placed there. Are there any restrictions that the county can play or local government can place in those circumstances on that kind of land?
So our view is that there are certainly, regulations and issues related to health and safety that the county may, impose, and there's other codes outside of what is strictly zoning that local jurisdictions have rights and responsibilities related to. Our real focus here is at the fundamental land use decision, because it's our property adjacent to transit. We want to make sure that it's supporting transit, that rests with the state, provided we go through this planning process that, as Joe and Dave have spoken to, would involve a substantial amount of engagement and an ultimate signature by the secretary to say, we've engaged, here's the work. So the zoning provisions would rely with the state, but that would not, exempt other local powers that exist on state-owned land.
Okay, so I think that definitely needs to be very clear inside of this law. So the property that I'm speaking about, the train station I'm talking about in my district, also happens to be right across from Martin State Airport and the Air National Guard base, right? So there are, for instance, height restrictions on how tall you can build buildings there. And so when you don't spell that out here, there seems to be an implied that someone could build a 20-story building there and cause some sort of disaster, right? So again, I think this needs to be really tightened up quite a bit.
Sure, and I think certainly appreciate that, and since we own Martin State Airport, we don't want anything bad to happen there as well. I think our fundamental goal in this provision is just to move the conversation forward on state-owned land toward the best transit supporting land use that we can arrive at in concert with the community, and that's where we want to start the conversation, but we want to make it work as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll see you fellows at what sound like very long subcommittee work sessions. With that, we have a panel of favorable witnesses: Cheryl Court from the Coalition for Smarter Growth, Jennifer Vey from the Greater Baltimore Committee, Dan Reed from Greater Washington, and Liz Price from WMATA. And if you could each pull the mics as close as you can without pulling them out and speak as loudly as you can. We're having a lot of trouble hearing up here. You go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. My name is Cheryl Court with the Coalition for Smarter Growth, where we advocate walkable, bikeable, inclusive, and transit-oriented communities as the most sustainable and equitable way for the Washington, D.C. region to grow and provide opportunities for all. HB 80 would facilitate transit-oriented development around Maryland rail stations and transit corridors. Below are some of the reasons why. First of all, transit-oriented development plays a critical role in resolving two key Maryland challenges: housing and transportation. Workers and families benefit from expanded transportation and housing options and greater affordability. Transit commuters typically save about $13,000 a year by driving less and owning fewer cars. State-owned TOD sites could support thousands of housing units in the Baltimore region along the Mark Penn line. And we know that Maryland's economy at the state and local level have benefited greatly from transit-oriented development, and the continued development of underutilized sites would add to these annual benefits. We know that the Maryland suburbs in DC and WMATA-owned land have generated hundreds of millions of dollars in local and state tax revenue with great potential into the future. HB 80 would help ensure legacy zoning provisions that are not intended to support transit-oriented development do not stand in the way of market demand for accessibly located housing and services. The bill would remove minimum parking requirements and instead allow parking supply to be determined by the specifics of the site and site accessibility for transit-oriented development projects within proximity of rail stations. This is considered a national best practice to ensure housing affordability and remove market obstacles. Lastly, the period of the state, given the fiscal constraint of the county, transit-oriented development is an important solution. We ask for a favorable report on this bill. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Jennifer Vey, the Executive Vice President and Chief Strategy Officer at the Greater Baltimore Committee. On behalf of GBC, I'm asking you to support House Bill 80. As the leading voice for the private sector in the Baltimore region, GBC is actively engaged in collective efforts to grow a dynamic and inclusive regional economy. As documented in our 10-year economic opportunity plan, we believe that encouraging the development of robust centers of regional economic activity centered around high-quality public transit is vital to that growth. The Baltimore region developed around a compact urban core with a radial network of roadways emanating out from it in a pretty efficient pattern. Of course, these were once served by trolley lines that connected businesses and workers with frequent and reliable service. But over many decades, scattered employment and development patterns have made it difficult to create and maintain a robust and effective transit system. Meanwhile, our light rail and our commuter rail systems were largely designed to support automobile access to stations, reducing opportunities for mixed-use development, and ultimately curtailing ridership. This bill seeks to remedy those issues and, if passed, has the potential to yield significant economic benefits for the Baltimore region and the state. First, research shows that the convenience and accessibility provided by transit-oriented development typically yields increased property values relative to other land uses. This rise in property values in turn increases tax revenues for local governments, which can in turn be reinvested in infrastructure, public services, et cetera. Second, TOD saves money. By concentrating development around transit stations, it maximizes land use areas where infrastructure and services are already in place, reducing the need for extensive new infrastructure and, of course, for costly parking spots. Third, TOG encourages people to rely less on private vehicles, which lowers household transportation costs. It also stimulates job creation and also attracts talent and private investment. For all these reasons, we ask you to support HB 80. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Dan Reed. I'm the Maryland Policy Director at Greater Washington. We're a nonprofit that supports sustainable, equitable housing, land use, and transportation across the DC area. We strongly support House Bill 80, which addresses two challenges Maryland currently faces, a budget crisis and a housing shortage. As you know, the state is facing a $3 billion budget shortfall, and that's expected to double by 2030. We're also showing estimates that the state is short as many as 150,000 homes, which results in rising prices and challenges for employers whose workers can't afford to live here. We did a poll last winter that found that 72% of Maryland voters want the state government to do something about high housing costs, and 60% support home builders, making it easier for home builders to build homes at transit stations. This bill is an opportunity to leverage one of our greatest assets, which is state-owned property, to provide the housing that we need and the economic development we need to fill our budget gap. You have my written testimony, so I want to take a second to talk about parking. I worked as a transportation planner for a decade on parking policy, and I also got up extra early this morning to get a coveted space in the Gotts Court garage. A lot of parking requirements that are set in local zoning come from a manual from something called the Institute for Transportation Engineers. They do scientific sounding studies about, for example, how many parking spaces a department store needs or an apartment building or a drive-through or what have you. Those studies come from one example from one department store in Buffalo, New York in 1984. I am not lying. That is where our local zoning codes in many places get their parking requirements from, and we wonder why there are so many empty spaces. It's not that cars are bad. It's not that parking is bad. It's that in many cases we are mandating more parking than we need. which adds additional cost. I'm happy to talk about parking as much as y'all would like. We ask for favorable report. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm Liz Price, Vice President of Real Estate and Development for Metro. Metro knows from experience that supportive policies and investments are instrumental to the success of TOD. Metro's nation-leading joint development program has completed transit-oriented developments at 31 stations that generate more than $200 million in annual local and state taxes. Future development potential could add 26,000 new housing units and over $300 million in annual tax revenue to the region, much of that in Maryland, at Maryland stations. This bill will help accelerate TOD throughout the state by encouraging smart growth land use policies and providing new financial tools to fund critical upfront investments. Metro has already seen the results that a collaborative approach to TOD can achieve. In the first 45 years of Metro's joint development program, 2.5 million square feet of commercial development and about 3,500 units of housing were built at Maryland Metro stations, which generate about $60 million of annual state and local taxes. As a result of TOD supportive policies and recent state and local investments combined with Metro's efforts to accelerate development, we now have 6,000 residential units currently in our pipeline in Montgomery and Prince George's County. Our partners have also delivered nearly 1,000 units of housing in 2024 alone, including 750 affordable units. These wins are only possible with the right policy environment. This bill expands the state's financial toolkit and supports smart growth policies that will encourage development in the places best equipped to support that growth within a half mile of transit. TOD zoning policies in Montgomery County and Prince George's counties and investments such as direct grants from the state, local, and federal partners, as well as local tax abatements, have been instrumental in accelerating Metro's TOD program in Maryland. For all of these reasons, we urge support of House Bill 80. Thank you.
Thank you. We have questions. Delegate Stein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The gentleman who offered to talk about parking restrictions, I'm sorry that all my questions about parking today, but MACO has suggested, and I don't know if you've seen their proposed amendment, where they're concerned that several counties have very limited service and lack the necessary public transit infrastructure to support no parking requirements. So they're proposing, I guess, an amendment to that provision about parking. Could you comment on that?
Sure. I think it's a valid concern. We want to make sure people can get where they're going. I think it's also fair that, well, a lot of the trips we take are very short, and they aren't just transit trips, right? You know, I think something like 83% of the trips we take are less than 3 miles long, right? These are often trips we could take by walking if we could. So yes, we need to invest significantly in more transit service. Trains should run all day and on the weekends. I don't think that should be a prerequisite to making it easier to build housing in the communities where people already live and work.
Okay, so I mean specifically about their concern that several counties don't have the parking available. They don't have the public infrastructure to support no parking requirements. I mean, I understand your point that, well, you don't want the no parking requirement to be impediment to developments of TODs, but specifically, you know, they're concerned that if you can force a parking requirement, then where will folks park? For Metro, for train access.
I think it's sort of unspoken here that parking would still be provided at stations, possibly in a parking garage instead of in a lot. There have been examples of this. You know, Metro has done a number of projects where they've redeveloped the parking lot with a parking garage, so they actually keep the same amount of parking, if not more, while making room for other uses at the station. So, you know, I can't speak for MDOT, but I think that could and should be part of the conversation.
Okay, thank you.
If I could, I would add one point to that. I think, just to reiterate, I don't think the concept is that there would be no parking at housing developments. It's just that the state would not be requiring a minimum amount, or the public sector. And I can say from Metro's perspective, you know, in Montgomery County, they recently passed legislation that would also eliminate parking minimums at transit locations. We have a number of projects, which I just talked about, which we expect to move forward. Most of those housing, all of those will have parking as part of it. It's just that the county will not be dictating how much. It's the project, the developer, the market will determine based on patterns, based on commuting patterns, based on expected resident needs and preferences. They will deliver the parking they think the project needs versus what the county has prescribed.
Thank you, Delegate Tarasa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I have two questions. One relates to affordable housing and sort of, because I applaud the economic development going on around the train stations and everybody wants their property values to rise. But if there's no affordable housing requirement and the property values are going up, how will we get affordable housing out of this?
I could speak for Metro. Metro doesn't have its own affordable housing, policy because we work in 2 states, in the District of Columbia and a number of counties, which all have their own to a great extent. So we follow all the local affordable housing requirements. And so in our case, in Montgomery County, it's a good example. One of the oldest inclusionary zoning, I think the first inclusionary zoning policy in this country requires that any new project have 15% affordable housing. So every project, I mean, this is unique to the DMV, every project in Montgomery County, by law has to deliver 15% affordable housing. So for Metro, where this is important, where we're able to achieve higher density at transit with high-rise construction, we can greatly expand the number of affordable housing units we deliver because it's 15% of whatever the total is. And so for us, we're very much focused on where we can support and work with our jurisdictional partners to support higher density construction at Metro, because if we can build 100 units, we get 15 affordable units. If we can build 200 units, we get 30 units. So that's our focus.
Then just as a follow-up to that, then do you have concerns about this bill overriding zoning regulations those very same zoning regulations that would require affordable housing?
It's not I don't want to speak for the bill because I didn't write it, but I don't believe it would override affordable housing requirements. And I will say for Metro, and I would say for the Washington Metro region, many of our jurisdictions have already kind of jumped on this bandwagon. So Montgomery County has already zoned all of our land high density, TOD oriented. So this is very, I think what the state's looking to do is to kind of enable more of TOD other places, but we have gotten a lot of support already from our county jurisdictional partners in Maryland.
Okay, yeah, and that's great. And so maybe it's just something that we need to have more discussion about in subcommittee, but it does seem to me from my read of this that this would override those zoning requirements, those very zoning requirements that you're relying on for affordable housing. So maybe that's something that needs to be tweaked if that's happening.
I don't want to speak for that, but I don't think that's, I don't believe that's.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but it sounds like you guys are relying on the local jurisdiction's zoning requirement for affordable housing.
I'm just saying we don't have our own, so we follow all, whatever the local program is, and so that is different in every jurisdiction. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then just on the parking, just to follow up on the parking issue. So again, I represent Howard County, and you talked about most places people have to go being within 3 miles, but that's really not. I don't know any doctor's offices that are within 3 miles of our stations. Do you have suggestions about that, or?
Do I have suggestions about?
How people without cars would be able to get to doctor's appointments, after-school activities, parent-teacher conferences, the government?
I'll be honest, this seems like an existing problem and sort of parallel to this bill.
Okay. Well, we have parking requirements in Howard County that help deal with that, but I hear you. Thank you.
Can I just add quickly, when it comes to affordability, transportation makes costs add tremendously to household budgets, about 17%. So when we think about affordability more holistically, in fact, aside from the specific question about affordable housing, TOD actually helps preserve affordability because it reduces the need for people to have, say, multiple vehicles in their household. And that in turn then means that they can afford, have more disposable income to spend on other things.
But don't they still need to drive in some places to doctor's appointments? And I mean, there's still going to be.
Sure, and I don't think the bill is necessarily trying to eliminate car ownership. I think what it's saying, though, is if we provide more access for people to live near transit, it may mean that a given household perhaps only needs to have one car instead of two because one of the folks in the people in that household. And
that's something we do in local zoning code, is make that sort of a lesser requirement, but still a requirement of parking.
Yes.
Thank you.
Delegate Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I'll wait till subcommittee. Thank you.
Are there any more questions for this panel? Okay, seeing none, we will call up the favorable with amendments. That is Angelica Bailey-Thumbari from the Maryland Municipal League, Dominic Butchko from MACO, and those are the only two I see. Thank you so much.
Want me to start?
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. Angelica Bailey-Thupari for the Maryland Municipal League. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Lot to unpack out of the last 45 minutes, I think. MACO and MML are both support with amendment posture. At this point, you've heard us talk ad nauseum over the years about how important local authority in zoning is, and it is not just a principle of the matter. There are pragmatic reasons for that argument. In this bill, for example, specifically, Brunswick in Frederick County had an affordable housing project that went up recently, 50 units, affordable housing. It was next to the Brunswick MARC station. If this bill had been in effect, the developer wanted less parking than the municipal parking minimum at the time, and that project would not have been viable. So that is one of those examples of unintended consequences and the ways in which a one-size-fits-all simply doesn't work. For these kinds of large state housing policies, you've heard us say it before, I'm going to keep saying it, especially, you hear something about a nuclear facility within half a mile, and that's just not appropriate for residential construction. So at this point, we are support with the amendment, but we look forward to continuing conversations with FDOT. Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Don Butchko with the Maryland Association of Counties, also here support with amendments with House Bill 80. In our testimony, we referenced two areas of the bill. First, on the parking area. One size fits all doesn't work in the state of Maryland. There are 3 counties in particular that are serviced by, quote, rail stations that receive spotty service. We're talking 2 in the morning to a major metropolitan area, DC or Baltimore, and 2 in the afternoon. These areas are not serviced by regular public transportation like a bus or something else, and it doesn't have the density that you would have in, there's a lot of talk about Montgomery County. The 3 jurisdictions I'm referencing are Frederick, Hartford, and Cecil. There's a lot of variability between those 3 jurisdictions. The second part of the bill I want to highlight references language on special taxing districts and what MDOT is trying to do there. I want to point out the difference between what the bill actually says versus MDOT's intent. The way we interpret the bill, this would give additional authority to MDOT to kind of take local revenues and use that for certain transportation projects within these special taxing districts. That is not the intent of MDOT. The intent of MDOT is to give counties and municipalities more tools. That being said, that is something that we would really like to work on and are very supportive of more tools, just not taking local revenue. There's also a number of other issues that this committee brought up that are salient and we'd be happy to address. And with that, I yield the rest of my time. Thank you.
Thank you both. Delegate Terrassa.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. And just really quickly, do you have any comment on whether this bill as written would override any affordable housing requirements or any ability for anyone to put in any parking requirements?
So the words may not take an action. Those are incredibly broad. I know when the MDOT folks were here, they were saying, no, it's very narrow. The word action is very broad. And so if a county had, let's say, an affordability threshold for a project, and there was an argument that that threshold was now a barrier to that housing project, then that threshold would be overridden.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Butchko, this question is for you. How would you characterize how this bill would fit into the governor's bill from last year, HB 538? How would that affect that from your standpoint?
So there was a lot of questions about adequate public facilities ordinances and a bunch of different stuff going back and forth on livability. Same answer to the previous one. May not take an action is pretty broad. And so anything that was kind of discussed last year, this could potentially be overriding.
Okay. Madam Chair, may I have one follow-up? Okay, and then just to put on the record, and it could be for either of you, how would counties or localities handle the circumstance that I described earlier today, where we're talking about literally a place that has nuclear material in the ground right now within 0.5 miles of a rail station? How would that be handled right now under current laws or zoning laws?
Yeah, so most counties don't want their residents to be glowing, so we would prevent that.
I think municipalities would probably agree.
Okay, I tend to agree with that as well, so thank you.
Any other questions? I do not see any. Thank you both so much. I think I might have missed two on the favorable panel. Bob Etten from the Maryland Building Association, Industry Association, and David Pendleton. David, yes, please come up. I want to make sure you're accounted for. And my apologies.
No need. Thank you.
You can begin whenever you're ready.
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of my favorite committee, House ENT. My name is David Pendleton. I'm the director for the International Association of Sheet Metal, Air, Rail, and Transportation Workers. We support this bill. I actually put on a uniform every day, except today, of course, but I work as a train conductor. I go past New Carrollton every day, and to see how New Carrollton has transformed from 4 big football field-sized parking lots into a bustling hub of economic activity is absolutely amazing. And it's something, it would be really great if this could be done all throughout the state. So we support this bill. I yield my time. Thank you for allowing me to address you.
Any questions for Mr. Pendleton? No, thank you so much. We appreciate you. We have one more witness. It is a virtual unfavorable, Eric Rockel. Mr. Rockel, are you there?
Yes, I am, Madam Chair. How are you?
And I'm well, thank you. You can begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you. I ask that the committee vote unfavorable with regard to the land use provisions of this law. Let me address the specific 2 provisions that give me a lot of heartburn. First is the removal of off-street parking requirements. And the remedy for that is a very simple one that exists in Baltimore County and I believe exists in all the other jurisdictions in the state, which is to seek a parking variance. In that instance, a parking variance would look at the specifics of the site, and if the site did not pose a harm to the health, safety, and welfare of the general area, that parking variance, in my experience, is always given. So I don't see the need for this. And in fact, if this law is enacted as written, what I see is potential for problems, because if the TOD site or mixed-use site doesn't have adequate parking, customers are going to park on an adjoining property, and then that's going to create a feud between the 2 property owners. Secondly, with regard to the 0.5 of a mile from a transit station allowing mixed use, I live in an area, and very close to me is one light rail transit station, and within 2 miles, there's a total of 3 stations. And in all cases, within a half mile of each of those stations are residentially zoned subdivision land. If this provision was enacted, potentially any of those residential subdivisions could become a mixed-use development site. The people within that subdivision did not buy their homes, live in their houses, expecting to have commercial property within the subdivision.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rockel, for your testimony. We really appreciate it. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Rockel? Delegate Guyton.
Hi, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to make it quick. Colleagues, I just want to say thank you, Mr. Rockel. It's nice to hear you today. And I don't think that you introduce yourself with your title and who you're representing. So I don't know if you'd like to do that just really quickly.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, delegates. Glad to see you. I'm the president of the Greater Timonium Community Council, which is an umbrella associations of many individual community associations in the Lutherville, Timonium, Caucusville area.
Thank you, and we thank you again for testifying. Seeing no more witnesses, that ends the hearing for HB 80, calling up now HB 288, Maryland Transportation Authority, tolls, fees, and other charges, temporary adjustments. Come on up. Somebody wants to drop it.
I'm so happy to see you. No. She's too smart for that.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, Mr. Chairman. Again, Bruce Gardner, Executive Director of the Maryland Transportation Authority. Here on I believe will be a much more simple bill to talk about, hopefully. I don't think there are any other panels signed up, but this is a bill that is at least not by your definition of a technical bill, but in ours at the Transportation Authority is making a fairly simple adjustment to an emergency toll setting period. In statute, in section 4312 of the transportation article, it's established for an emergency toll setting process. Currently, the emergency status determination may not exceed 180 days. So the last page of the bill, you'll see a number. It's 180 days. And what we're proposing, is to go to 300 days. The reason for the 300 days is that in order for us to go through the determination of a tolls, develop recommendations, preparing hearing materials, taking time to do the public hearings, the comment periods, we believe is about a 300-day process for that. So what we don't want is a roller coaster situation where if we have to implement tolls on an emergency basis for something in the future, nothing related to this past year in emergency, but we looked at everything this past year in terms of finances and discovered this disconnect. But we think it should be the 300 days so that we don't have to reduce a toll, and then at the end of the hearing process, when we determine what the tolls are and the board votes, that we'd have to, take them to that level, either what we proposed in the initial period or something different. But instead of that roller coaster, we'd be able to do an incremental change and then either keep it the same or another incremental change at the end of the process. So fairly simple bill in terms of drafting, very simple, but that's hopefully provides you an explanation of what we are intending with the bill. And I'd be happy to answer any questions. I will note from listening to the prior testimony, though, that I will not take offense at the comment that Howard County doesn't have a good transportation system, since I previously served in the Office of Transportation for Howard County, but I'll ignore that.
Thank you. And Mr. Gardner, thanks for your work over the past 10 months. We know it's been really difficult for you and MDTA. The first question or confirmation is from Delegate Terrassa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Gardner. Isn't it true that Howard County had transportation problems before you got there, and you made them much better?
I'll just say thank you. If I don't, not going to not come one way or other. Thank you.
Thank you for all your work in Howard County and then in the job that you're in now.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right. Thank you. Yep, Delegate Healy.
Just a quick question. Would this 300 days or even the 180 days that we're talking about currently, is it a two-way street? I mean, is it like whether you go up or down, or is it because
Yes.
the last administration, they suddenly dropped the charges and then there were things that needed to be paid for?
Yes, I remember it well. So it's up or down. It's the up or down. So, you know, in that situation, there were changes made to the law that said there had to be notification whichever way they went, because it wasn't contemplated that they would go down before.
Okay.
So our intent would be, you know, a similar situation here.
Thank you.
Okay, that concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 288. We'll turn to House Bill 230. It's a departmental Maryland Public Ethics Law Training and Financial Disclosure Requirements revisions.
All right. Okay. Good afternoon, Chairman Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, Ethics Subcommittee Chair Lewis, and members of the committee. My name is Jennifer Alger. I'm the Executive Director of the State Ethics Commission. House Bill 230 is departmental legislation. I also think it's a simple bill. Departmental legislation requested by the State Ethics Commission. This legislation will not have any fiscal impact on the State Ethics Commission, and any operational impact can be absorbed by the agency using its existing resources. As many of you know, the State Ethics Commission is responsible for providing mandatory ethics training to certain elected officials, to state employees that file an annual financial disclosure statement, to other designated public officials, and also to lobbyists. This proposed departmental legislation removes the current 2-hour time requirement language from the training provision, and now recognizes the option to provide online training or live training for the officials, employees, and lobbyists when it's conducted by the State Ethics Commission staff. This proposed legislation will allow for greater flexibility in both format and duration while preserving the content requirements for all of the ethics training. The amendment that was offered on the Senate side to this legislation is welcome. It clarifies which specific topics have to be covered during the mandatory training provided by the Commission staff. This proposed legislation also clarifies that all sources of compensated employment must be disclosed on an annual financial disclosure statement. The current language is salaried employment, and that tends to limit disclosure of potential conflicts of interest. The proposed language is compensated employment. That reflects a change in a lot of the way that current employment, outside employment is held, and we think that it will encourage more transparency for state employees and officials when they are filing their financial disclosure statements. Finally, this legislation also corrects a statutory reference in the gift provisions. The State Ethics Commission thanks the committee for consideration of this departmental legislation and seeks a favorable report, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions on this departmental? Okay, thank you. That concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 230. Do we have Delegate Mangione?
He's right around the corner.
Okay. Do you want to get him?
Well, he was speaking with someone, so.
Okay. Do we have Delegate Fair? Delegate Healy.
Delegate Fair is here.
Oh, we got it. Delegate Fair. Delegate Fair, HB 247, Motor Vehicles Provisional Driver's License Examinations, Unaccompanied Homeless Youths.
Okay. Thank you, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and esteemed members of the House Environment and Transportation Committee. Delegate Chris Fair presenting House Bill 247, aiming to help homeless youth under 19 who hold a learner's permit but who need to transport themselves independently. This bill allows them to follow the same requirements for obtaining a provisional driver's license as those who are 19 years and older. Currently, youth under 19 must complete a mandatory 9-month waiting period between receiving their learner's permit and testing for their provisional license. While operating a vehicle with a learner's permit, the youth must be accompanied by an adult. Unhoused youth, defined in this bill as those meeting the standards of the federal McKinney-Vento Act, are desperately relying on access to consistent, independent transportation for self-sufficiency since they need to travel to school, work, and other supports. The 9-month mandatory requirement places a burden on these young people trying to survive, forcing them to find support organizations like Frederick County's Student Homelessness Initiative Partnership to provide an adult to sit in the car with them well beyond the 60 hours of in-car instruction required by law. House Bill 247 seeks to provide relief to only those individuals who qualify as McKinney-Vento homeless youth. It lowers the mandatory number of months for in-car instruction from 9 months to 3 months, while still maintaining the 60-hour road readiness requirement. In addition to the driving training courses they complete, these young people are required to drive every day to support themselves, and thus many complete the mandatory 60 hours in just a few months. This leaves these youth without the transportation independence that they need simply because they must wait for 9 months to test. This bill seeks to help our literal most vulnerable population, unlocking their ability to be self-sufficient and decrease the demands on hardworking social services that support these young people. Additionally, the modification offers them safety and security by enabling them to leave dangerous situations and access shelters or low-income housing. Moreover, a provisional driver's license serves as an official form of identification, which is essential for accessing governmental and non-governmental services. I urge the Environment and Transportation Committee to empower homeless youth to access necessary resources, job opportunities, and education to help lift themselves from homelessness and poverty. I ask for a favorable report on House Bill 247. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the bill sponsor? Okay, we have at least one virtual witness, Monica Johnson, SHIP of Frederick County. Ms. Johnson, go ahead when you're ready.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. I am Monica Johnson, the Program Administrator at the Student Homelessness Initiative Partnership in Frederick County, Maryland. I am here today in support of the proposed bill, HB 0247, to reduce the wait time to obtain a driver's license for youth experiencing homelessness under the McKinney-Vento Act. This change is vital to addressing the unique challenges faced by students and ensuring that they have tools and resources to achieve stability and self-sufficiency. Our driver's education program at SHIP has been running successfully, and the demand from students is consistently high. The current wait time of 9 months between permitting and licensing poses a significant barrier, not just for obtaining a driver's license, but also for achieving critical goals in the areas of employment and education. By making this change, we can provide students with a pathway to reliable transportation, opening doors to greater opportunities and reducing the number of adults experiencing homelessness in the future. The McKinney-Vento Act already provides an established and effective third-party verification process, which allows agencies and schools to issue signed letters of verification eligibility. These letters are already utilized for accessing state and federal financial aid, as well as hospital-based financial assistance. To date, 152 students have received services through our driving program. Of those, more than half have completed all requirements and have tested for licensure. However, the current waiting period leaves a significant portion of students who are otherwise ready but unable to move forward. We have seen firsthand the transformative impact of this program on students' lives. Students who are able to reliably interview, secure employment, commute to work, and earn wages above minimum wage. Some have taken on jobs requiring a driver's license, such as delivery services, which offer hours that fit around school schedules. By eliminating the need to rely on limited public transportation, students have flexibility to accept jobs with more adaptable hours. Reducing the wait time is a critical step to remove barriers. Thank you for your time and attention to this.
Thank you. I believe our other virtual witness is not here. They are here? Not here. The thumbs up was because I was correct, not that they were here. Delegate Celebrity has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate Fair, how are you faring today? Everything all right? Good.
Thank you. Much appreciated, sir.
The issue of homeless youth, how does that impact on the ability of the homeless person to obtain insurance?
Organizations like SHIP in Frederick County help guide the young person through that process to obtaining insurance and even finding a car and purchasing their first car. What we find is that, especially for homeless youth, their largest challenge is finding available work that meets the needs, the transportation needs of that youth without access to a car, especially when they have a learner's permit.
So it's not a major problem?
No, I wouldn't say that the insurance is a major problem because they have support organizations, as long as they have a support organization that can assist for them and sign off as essentially in the guardianship role. Monica, forgive me, correct me if I'm incorrect here, because I think I'm pretty.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, any further questions? Okay, thank you very much, Delegate. That concludes the bill hearing on HB 247. We're going to turn to HB 248. Delegate Griffith, motor vehicle registration fee exemption, unemployable disabled veterans.
Well, first I have to say it's great to be back. I felt like I was here half of session last year, so it's great to see all my friends on the ENT committee. So thank you, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Delegate Mike Griffith, and I'm requesting a favorable report on HB 248, motor vehicle registration fee exemption, unemployable disabled veterans. Currently, the Motor Vehicle Administration waives the vehicle registration fee for veterans with varying disabilities, such as being 100% or totally disabled or having lost the use of a hand. While I'm thankful the registration fees for veterans with these varying disabilities have been waived, there is one subcategory that has been unintentionally overlooked and is those deemed to be individually unemployable due to service-connected disabilities. In fact, this committee recognized this last year, that there was an overlooked group of folks when this committee passed my bill last year, closing that loophole for certain DNR licenses, and I'm thankful to you for that. So now we're trying to close the last remaining known loophole for unemployable veterans. But as a refresher, what does individually unemployable mean? It simply means, in simple terms, it refers to a veteran that cannot hold down a steady job due to disabilities they sustained while in service to their country. In technical terms, it's defined by the Department of Veterans Affairs. It's a veteran that is unable to hold down a job who also has at least one service-connected disability rated 60% or higher, two or more service-connected disabilities with at least one rated 40% or more, and a combined total rating of 70% or more. Veterans who are rated unemployable receive the same benefits as those with a 100% rating, but due to a technicality in the definition, they do not qualify for the vehicle exemption here in Maryland as those with a typical 100% rating would receive. My bill aims to fix that by adding these heroes to the list of current exemptions. This will then bring them into line to receive the same entitlement that veterans with the same benefits currently receive. Also, since I do recognize this is a fee exemption bill, I do want to know two important specifications. One, the most recent data from 2023 shows the number of veterans that are rated unemployable in Maryland is only 3,997. Also, understanding the physical environment we are in and considering the concerns shared by this committee last year regarding this bill, my bill this year caps the number of exemptions to one vehicle per veteran. Ideally, we would prefer no cap, but also we understand that one exemption for these veterans is better than no exemptions, and it's better to do something than nothing, especially in this environment. Because of these two mechanisms, it's our estimation that the impact of this exemption will not be large in scale. In fact, the Department of Veterans Affairs and Military Families has noted the same sentiment. In their letter of information, as they share, there will be a relatively small physical and operational implication because of this bill. I would also like to share that the Maryland Department of Transportation has also provided a letter of information and has taken no opposition to the bill, further indicating no concern with its implication and fiscal impact. In closing, I do want to address the letter of opposition by the Joint Veterans Committee of Maryland. They note that the bill calls out unemployable veterans and discriminates against them by limiting the number of exemptions. As I shared earlier, I would love to remove the cap. I'm sure everyone in this committee would love to remove the cap, as I'm sure everyone in this committee would definitely agree. However, being pragmatic and understanding our physical environment, I understand why we would need a cap, at least in the short term, to allow this legislation to move forward this year in this environment while still providing a service for our veterans and bringing these folks in line with other veterans receiving the same types of benefits. It's better to do something than nothing. Furthermore, there is a concern stated that the language of the bill was not clear as to who would qualify under this provision. To address this, our office had extensive communication with the policy drafters and MDOT on this language, and all agree the implementation is very clear as written. This bill applies to veterans that are unemployable with this designation as defined, as I shared earlier, by the Department of Veterans Affairs. In closing, again, this committee did recognize that these folks are left out of other areas like DNR, and thank you for the committee for helping right that wrong, and we hope we can try to right this wrong in this session with this bill. I wanted to note very briefly, this bill is being cross-filed by JPR Chair Senator Will Smith. Thank you for the time, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Delegate. Any questions on the legislation? Okay, we do have a, thank you. We do have a virtual unfavorable witness, Nigel Forney from the Joint Veterans Committee. Sir, you can go ahead whenever you're ready.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
We can hear you just fine.
Good afternoon, Chairperson and Vice Chairperson. I am Nigel Forney. I am representing the Joint Veterans Committee of Maryland. We oppose this bill. This bill discriminates against unemployed disabled veterans. The veterans are unemployable status is due to the injuries that they incurred during their service in the military. This bill also discriminates against the veterans because they are unemployable, while their fellow veterans that are rated 100% this total disability, that they are not affected by this bill. Also, this bill is written only unemployable disabled veterans are impacted and can only have one vehicle registered for free, while other veterans can have as many vehicles as they please. One of the reasons many veterans reside in the state of Maryland is for property and vehicle exemptions. This bill will likely change some of these veterans' minds. This bill imposes an undue hardship on unemployable disabled veterans. These unemployable disabled veterans are on a fixed income. This bill targets the unemployable disabled veterans. The monies that we're going to have to pay for these vehicles, the other veterans are not going to have to pay. This could be used to purchase food or for heating during these cold winter months. Some of the employable veterans has modified vehicles that are designed for them to drive after they go through hours of training, in which by their spouses or their family members may not feel comfortable in driving these vehicles. The national average of a household is 2 vehicles per household. This bill is biased and unacceptable. These veterans didn't ask to choose to become unemployable. They fought life and limb and sacrificed their bodies, their mind, and their families for the rights and freedom of the American people. We also feel that this bill is unnecessary. Line 8, states, has designated or classified by the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs the loss of an arm, hand, arm, leg, or disabled total disability. Total disability and unemployable disability is classified under the same category under the VA, which is total and permanent. Therefore, the Joint Veterans Committee of Maryland requests an unfavorable on this bill that discriminates against veterans for having a disability caused by their patriotism and service to our great nation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and thank you for your service. Are there any questions for this witness? I do not see any. Have a great afternoon. That concludes the bill hearing on HB 248. We'll turn to House Bill 200, Delegate Mangione, Work Group to Study School Bus Safety, Maryland School Bus Safety Act of 2025.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this bill I brought last year, I'll be very brief and right to the point here. Good afternoon to Mr. Chair and the committee. I'm Delegate Nina Mangione, representing District 42A. I'm pleased to be here in support of House Bill 200. As the chair just mentioned, that's the Maryland School Bus Safety Act of 2025. This legislation provides for the establishment of a work group to study and identify issues related to the safety of students and bus drivers on school buses driven to and from primary or secondary schools in Maryland. It also requires that the work group to report its findings and recommendations to the governing body of each county and to Baltimore City. Regretfully, we continue to receive reports every year of increasing episodes of violence on our school buses. We owe it to the parents of Maryland to find a solution to school bus violence and safety, to move quickly in providing the protection students and school employees deserve. Parents have a right to expect their children will be safe and can ride a school bus free of violence. Our school bus drivers have the right to be safe as they do their job. Safety issues should be a primary concern of everyone. We cannot continue to risk the safety of our students and the drivers that are at risk if a fight breaks out on a bus. We need to start a process that studies school bus violence and how to end it, and I believe we need to do this immediately. School bus violence is not a partisan issue. This is an issue that we can all work together and resolve this problem. This study group, this bill would establish, will bring bright minds together to identify issues that need to be resolved for the safety of every Maryland child on a school bus or an employee who drives a school bus. Best part about the bill, we can do it with our existing resources. There is no fiscal note. And again, I believe we owe it to students, parents, and bus drivers to act, and I urge you to support House Bill 200. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions on this bill? Okay, I do not see any. There was a virtual witness who I do not believe is here. So that concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 200.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, the committee.
We're going to jump down to House Bill 7 from the Vice Chair, Vehicle Laws, Bicycles, Operation at Intersections.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. For the record, I am Delegate Regina T. Boyce, presenting HB 7, Vehicle Laws, Bicycles, Operation at Intersection. This bill, previously introduced in 2024 as HB 511, addresses a critical aspect of bicycle safety and traffic management. I want to thank this committee, most importantly, now Chair Stewart and now our Senator Love for their work on this bill. They created quite a stir on the floor last year. HB 7 authorizes a cyclist approaching a stop sign to cautiously make a turn or proceed through the intersection without stopping, as long as the cyclist reduces their speed to a reasonable rate and yields the right of way to other vehicles. From 2011 to 2020, fatalities of bicyclists and other cyclists surged by 38%, reaching 938 in 2020. A striking 26% of these fatalities occurred at intersections in 2020, emphasizing the perilous nature of intersections for cyclists. HB 7 would serve as a critical step towards enhancing road safety and aligning Maryland cyclist law with best practices observed nationwide. 8 states, Arkansas, Delaware, Idaho, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Oregon, Utah, and Washington State have implemented stop as yield laws for cyclists. Notably, Delaware reported a 23% reduction in interstate crashes within 30 months following the enactment of similar legislation. The conventional requirement of cyclists to come to a complete stop at intersection discourages cycling and also poses risk of injury due to strains and collision hazards. Stop as yield laws empower cyclists to manage risk more effectively, enhance their visibility to drivers, and reduce their exposure to potential accidents. Furthermore, bicyclists have a vested interest in yielding at intersections, given their heightened vulnerability to injury in such scenarios. Additionally, Maryland's commitment to Complete Streets and Vision Zero initiatives underscores the state's dedication to mitigating injuries and fatalities on its roadways, particularly for vulnerable road users. I do want to point out there are a couple of letters of opposition, and I think it has to do with the word highway, and it, I believe, gives the impression that cyclists would be on 97 or 695 or 95 yielding, and that is not the case. This is highway, which is 2 lanes or less, and so we're talking about our general roadways. And with that, I thank the committee for their time and consideration of HB 7. Yes, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Delegate Boyce. Thank you, Chair Corman and members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. I'm Seth Grimes. I'm with the Washington Area Bicyclist Association, and we support this bill. As Delegate Boyce reported to you, statistics show that intersections are particularly dangerous for bicyclists. A statistic from the National Highway Traffic Administration reports that 54.5% of bicyclist injuries occur at intersections. Bicyclists are at risk of being rear-ended when stationary. They can be right-hooked by turning vehicles, sideswiped by vehicles accelerating past them at a stop. And I'll add that further, when a bicyclist proceeds after yielding the right-of-way properly through an intersection without stopping, then that bicyclist will clear the intersection more quickly, easing the traffic flow. As Delegate Boyce observed, quite a number of states have this very law in place with very positive data, such as in Delaware. I will cite actually a National Highway Traffic Safety Administration analysis, bicycle stop as yield law analysis that was issued just last month in December 2024, quoting, "Results indicate that stop as yield laws were associated with reduced crash rates, with reductions at most prominent at suburban stop-controlled intersections and urban signal-controlled intersections. The findings also say that stop-as-yield laws do not significantly influence reckless bicycling behavior, but further examination of crash contributory behavior factors is warranted." So this is a matter for continued study, but the results from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and in states that have reported in have been very positive. WABA urges you to advance this bill with a favorable report. Thank you.
Great. As you all continue your testimony, this bill came out of this committee unanimously last year. It was 119 to 13 on the House floor, and the only changed member of this committee is our one member without a car. So just keep that in mind as you're testifying.
Good afternoon, Chairman Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, members of the committee. Judd Weeks, Executive Director of Bike More, asking you to vote favorably on this bill. Bike More advocates for the thousands of Baltimoreans who walk, bike, and take transit, and those who wish to, but for it currently being unsafe or inconvenient for them. Seth really highlighted this new information we've received since the last hearing, which is this more thorough NISTA evaluation on the safety. So I can skip over that, but I really wanted to address some concerns we heard about this legislation last session from the equestrian community. As someone who grew up in Glencoe, Maryland, in horse country, riding and caring for horses, driving trailers and other equipment, I understand the concerns that were raised in that testimony, but I think they're a bit misplaced. When driving full-size trucks and trailers on rural roads, you're always preparing to stop in an upcoming always stop. You're driving a heavy vehicle, you're aware of those dangers, and you're driving appropriately and carefully. A bicyclist conducting a lawful safety yield at an always stop is in no danger of being struck by a driver in that situation, as long as that driver is also operating lawfully. This really only leaves potential interactions where a bicyclist has a stop at an intersection and a driver does not, meaning the driver has right-of-way. In these instances, the bicyclist still has the duty to stop for an approaching driver under this legislation. Sure, a bicyclist could act recklessly and fly out into the intersection, but they can do that right now. This legislation does not impact that. If this legislation passed and that were to hopefully never occur, but if it were to occur, the driver would be found not at fault. So I understand the fear and concern that's behind that opposition we heard last year, but I don't really believe this legislation will realize those fears or concerns. And so given the data showing this will reduce crashes and make Maryland's roads safer for everyone, most importantly vulnerable road users, I urge the committee to vote favorably on HB 7. Thank you.
Hi, John Corrin, Bicycle Advocates for Annapolis and Anne Arundel County. Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, thanks for bringing the bill. Delegate Stewart, thanks for co-sponsoring the bill this year. I will just try to be quick and incremental. We know that this is counterintuitive to drivers. Drivers who do not ride bikes on the street, we know this is counterintuitive. All we want to do is get from A to B safely. And yield is the quickest way. It gets a cyclist through the intersection when they have clear sight lines. It gets them through faster. It gets them through more reliably. And cyclists who come to a full stop when not necessary start out slower, wobbly, subject to falling. And it also clears the intersection quicker, which has sort of a congestion reduction benefit to drivers as well. So again, as Chair Corman pointed out, this was unanimous through the committee. Last year, we hope the same again, and this year we hope to get it through JPR as well. Thank you.
Joshua Feldmark here representing Bike Maryland, and on behalf of every cyclist in the state of Maryland, I'd like to say us too.
Great. Any questions for this panel? Okay, we had one, thank you. We had one more favorable witness sign up. I don't know if they're here. Franz Schneiderman, Consumer Auto.
Oh, it's my constituent.
Now we know why he signed up. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Chairman Corman, members of the committee, for the opportunity to address the bill. And thanks to my delegate, Delegate Regina Boyce, who's a fellow North Baltimore resident and cyclist in North Baltimore. I'm Franz Schneiderman. I work with Consumer Auto Maryland. We're a group devoted to protecting Maryland consumers and Maryland drivers, but that also extends to road users more generally. And I just want to add my voice to those who point out that this really promotes safety both for drivers and for cyclists. All the data seems to show there are fewer collisions between cars and cyclists when this kind of legislation is in force. That's good not just for cyclists, but for drivers, of course. As a bicyclist, I know that bicyclists, it works. You've got a different set of challenges than when you're driving, and this is a smart and sensible adaptation to the ways bicycles work in going through low-volume intersections in particular. I also want to say that making our roads more friendly to cyclists, it's not only good for public health, but it helps cut congestion, helps cut traffic, and it makes the roads more accessible for people who maybe can't afford to use a car. I talk a lot as a car guy about just how expensive and burdensome the high costs of car ownership are to people. So I think we really need to take every step we can to make the roads, which are after all a public resource, accessible to people who might not be able to afford that, like cyclists, like transit users, et cetera. And this, it boosts safety for everybody and boosts access to the roads for people who may not be able to afford driving. So I appreciate you supporting the bill before. I hope you can support it again. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. And seeing no questions, that concludes the hearing on this very fabulous bill here, Madam Vice Chair.
Well, thank you, sir. Thank you.
We will now turn to HB 48, HB 48, and that would be our very own Delegate Healy.
I also have a pen, very small pen. Good afternoon, everyone. Mr. Chair, members of the committee. This House Bill 48, but for the record, I'm Delegate Ann Healy representing House Bill 48, which protects property owners from any future maglev projects. People who know me and who know the history of this know that I have introduced this bill a few times. But they may not remember that the very first time I introduced it in 2018, It was actually passed and was enrolled in 2018, but Governor Hogan vetoed it, and because it was an election year, we did not have the opportunity to override that veto. So I've put it in since a couple times, and it has not come up for a vote recently. But I will tell you that a lot has happened, and a lot is waiting to happen. The bill specifies that the general authority given to a railroad company does not apply to a company that's powered by a magnetic levitation propulsion system. This bill is much simpler than the original bill because in 2018, there were a number of other ideas about what to do along the Baltimore-Washington Parkway between Washington and Baltimore. Governor Hogan had a proposal to add 4 lanes and do away with the park aspect of the parkway. And Elon Musk had a proposal to put cars into pneumatic tubes and run them through a tunnel along the parkway. So that original bill was much broader. This bill is very simple. It simply states that in Maryland, a magnetic levitation device is not a railroad in the sense that has the power of eminent domain. The power of eminent domain, how did it get to be part of the railroads? In 1875, we're going to talk back history, the original robber barons, the Vanderbilts, were able to persuade the US Congress to pass a law that has been the law ever since. The railroads have the same power as governments to take land, and they do have to compensate the owners, but this is not a railroad in that sense. There are no rails involved in this. My friend here from SMART has really good testimony, and I know he's going to speak about this, but I do want to point out that the proponents for the maglev project came here to Maryland a long time ago and started a very, very important approach to try to get people to agree to have the magnetic levitation technology that's been used in Japan and elsewhere come to Maryland. There was a lot of pushback from people along the alignments, and the alignments were reduced down to one that they finally chose, which is right alongside the Baltimore-Washington Parkway. And the original proposal also was mostly going to be above ground. They decided, because of the pushback, that they were going to try to do tunnels underneath most of the property because it's heavily populated area that they're talking about. That is not really acceptable to the people who live along the alignment, whether it's in Prince George's County or in Anne Arundel County or anywhere along the alignment where people are concerned about tunnels under their homes that will weaken and perhaps destroy the value of their residential properties. And the NEPA study, the study for the environmental protection, was conducted. They have not come to a conclusion. It's all on pause. The original this was proposed decades ago, and that was put on pause and brought back to life about 10 years ago. So this is, all I'm saying now is that in the sales pitch at the beginning, they said, we're never going to use eminent domain, to which my original bill was put in saying, well, if you're never going to use it, let's put it in law that you can. And they opposed that, and the governor vetoed it. Since then, this company did threaten to use eminent domain in a way that would have jeopardized a redevelopment project in Baltimore City. There have been a lot of legal goings around, lawsuits, settlements, but the main thing about it is that even though that that particular issue was settled, the law about whether or not this company should have eminent domain powers to condemn people's property, to take it, to undermine it without their permission, without the property owner's permission, has not been settled law yet. And if we can pass this law, it will make it very clear that this is not the kind of company that was envisioned as a railroad 100+ years ago in 1875 when the railroads got this power. So with that, I would be happy to yield for questions and also ask you to listen to my partner here.
Thank you, Delegate Healy. Any questions for the sponsor of the legislation? Seeing none, I will go to Mr. Pendleton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the ENT. Thank you for having me again. Once again, my name is David Pendleton, Director of the Maryland Safety and Legislative Board for the Transportation Division of SMART. We represent over 230,000 members, many of them working for Amtrak and MARC. We're here today in support of HB 48, Railroad Companies Condemnation Authority and Application. HB 48 would prohibit a railroad that is powered by a magnetic levitation propulsion system from using railroad eminent domain powers to acquire private property in the state. In 2015, the Baltimore-Washington Rapid Rail acquired a defunct rail company in Maryland that had been abandoned by the Washington-Baltimore and Annapolis Electric Railway for nearly 80 years. There's only one logical reason for this, is so that they can utilize legacy eminent domain powers that bygone railroad company has to take private property from residents of Maryland who refuse to cooperate with their agenda. Last year, in 2024, nearly 1 million people rode Amtrak and MARC to BWI rail station. Over 1.5 million used MARC or Amtrak to ride to Baltimore Penn Station. Our current Amtrak and MARC rail systems can meet the needs of rail travel from DC, BWI to Baltimore City, but it does need investment to maintain and modernize its systems. It makes no sense to enable a company to seize state residents as private property, to build a system that will operate along the same route that what is currently in place, that will only decrease travel time between these cities by approximately 15 minutes. That will mostly be used by a few residents who are in the upper income for our tax brackets. At a time when income inequality because of disparity in opportunities is so obvious, we do not need to exacerbate this problem by investing in an ultra-expensive, unnecessary system. Maglev is the trains, what the Concorde was the planes. We all know how that ended. It ended badly, and governments were left holding the bag. Thank you for your time and my consideration of our position. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Does anyone have questions for this panel? Thank you so much. Seeing none, we will go to the unfavorable panel. We have Ray Baker, Michael Sakata, Thurman Jones, Ian Rainey. We'll start there, and then there's another set of individuals. Thank you so much. You'll have 2 minutes each. Please make sure you state your name for the record. Start when you're ready.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairwoman Boyce, members of the committee. My name is Ray Baker. I serve as the Maryland Director for the Baltimore D.C. Building Trades Council, representing 28 affiliates and 30,000 workers across the Baltimore D.C. region. The Baltimore D.C. Building Trades strongly opposes HB 48. We believe it to be an attempt to explicitly stop the maglev train, and the legislation jeopardizes a significant economic opportunity and engine for the region. We recognize some of the points that were made by those that others. However, we want to stress the opportunity and potential for great economic development and the opportunity for jobs, both maintenance jobs, construction jobs, and operational jobs that our members, your constituents, would ultimately be responsible for working on, and our investments in our local communities with regard to local hiring would ensure that those jobs go to these very residents who we all are supportive of and who make up our members. Additionally, we know that when we make legislation here in Maryland, should we need to revamp that legislation, should that legislation prove erroneous at the time for what we need in the future, that it is very difficult to come back and then try to amend that. Without acknowledging this august body here, you guys move with all quickness and efficiency and expediency. Some of our colleagues sometimes may not have such quickness. And so if we have this legislation right now, that'll put undue and unnecessary burden on something that we may want to come back and revisit later on, and we see no need for that. So on behalf of the Baltimore, D.C. building trades, the 28 affiliates that we represent, and the 30,000 construction workers in our region, we urge an unfavorable report on HB 48. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Vice Chair Boyce, members of the committee. My name is Ian Rainey, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Baltimore Washington Rapid Rail. I appear before you today to convey our strong opposition to HB 48. This bill seeks to remove the power of eminent domain from a single franchised railroad, Baltimore Washington Rapid Rail. It would circumvent the administrative processes put in place whereby franchise authority, and hence eminent domain authority, is granted by the Maryland Public Service Commission after review, public notice, and hearings. BWRR, Baltimore Washington Rapid Rail, undertook this public process, which resulted in the PSC granting a railroad franchise in November 2015. And in granting the franchise, the commission found that the construction and operation of the maglev between Baltimore and Washington, D.C. will result in substantial economic and social benefits to the state and the city of Baltimore, and would be consistent with the state's environmental laws and policies enacted or adopted to reduce harmful emissions for cleaner air and address the causes of climate change. HB 48 appears to ask the legislature without justification to step in and change the law for a single project and franchisee, thus undermining the entire administrative process undertaken by the Public Service Commission. Baltimore Washington Rapid Rail is committed to working with landowners and communities to minimize the impacts of the proposed maglev project. And indeed, a route has been developed that would result in no takings of homes along the alignment. Removal of the eminent domain authority provided under Maryland law and regulated by the Public Service Commission would be tantamount to stopping this project or any future project using magnetic levitation technology in the future. And there's no evidence of harm that would warrant such an action. BWR believes it's essential to let the normal regulatory and legal processes in place work and avoid setting a precedent of upsetting current laws. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair and members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. I serve as the President and CEO of Maryland Transportation Builders and Materials Association. We are the leading voice of for the transportation industry here in the state of Maryland. We represent leading businesses of all sizes in construction, transportation, materials, engineering, consulting industries. We work together to enhance the safety of our system and build support for the sustainability to grow the network. We have a fiscal crisis here. We all know it. You all know it. I'm here today to speak in strong opposition of HB 48, which would prohibit the railroad powered by a maglev system from using condemnation authority, which the state allows for, as we've heard, from other railroad companies. Removing this authority would essentially derail this project before it has even begun. I think it's important to note that, for the record, during the hearing to provide BWR with the railroad franchise license, a Public Service Commission received a multitude of comments supporting the franchise license, with no letters or comments opposing the license. At a time when our state's transportation budget has been and continues to be cut significantly, our member companies, our legacy companies, the men and women in Maryland who do work in this state and other states, are hurting. Maglev rail systems represent a cutting-edge transportation technology. Their construction requires specialized skills. Training provides a pathway for workers to engage in innovative and technology-advanced projects. Our industry relies on both small and large-scale projects. I think it's important to note maglev's been around since a patent dated to 1912. Other countries are actively using this project since 1960s and successfully operated commercial maglev since 2005. Despite its proven track record as a safe, efficient, and environmentally friendly solution, HB 48 is unfairly singled out. So please
vote no. Thank you so much, Mr. Sakata. Thurman Jones? No. Lamar Mutz? Aisha Bond? And Deborah Harrington. The next panel can come up. Thank you so much. Whenever you're ready, you can begin.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and members of the House Environment and Transportation Committee. My name is Deborah Harrington. I'm a resident of Prince George's County and the founder and CEO of Energy Audits and Green Solutions, which is a certified woman and minority business. I'm here strongly to oppose House Bill 48, which seeks to prevent maglev-powered railroads from using condemnation authority. This bill would essentially halt Maryland's opportunity to develop a maglev transportation project, which promises significant economic, labor, and environmental benefits, especially for historically underserved communities. The Baltimore-Washington maglev project represents a transformative opportunity for minority and woman-owned businesses, especially within Black communities. With $4 billion earmarked for these businesses, the project will create jobs and construction opportunities that are urgently needed in invested areas. These jobs will provide high-wage, sustainable employment, and help close long-standing economic gaps. I had the opportunity to experience the maglev train in Tokyo, Japan last summer, and I can say this would be a game changer for Maryland. Efficient, fast, and environmentally friendly. In Japan, maglev trains have cut travel times dramatically. Not only should Maryland avoid standing in the way of this technology, but should support and embrace it. This would modernize our infrastructure, reduce congestion, and create thousands of jobs across multiple sectors. And for communities like mine in Prince George's County, it's a generational and vital opportunity. As a woman and minority business owner, I urge you to vote against House Bill 48. For these reasons, I oppose House Bill 48 and request the committee return an unfavorable report. Thank you for your time and attention, but more importantly, for your service.
Thank you so much. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair and members of the Environment Transportation Committee. My name is Lamar Mutz. I'm with the Eastern Atlantic States Regional Council of Carpenters, a council representative. I'm here in the opposition of House Bill 48. Eastern Atlantic States Regional Council of Carpenters has 43,000 members across 6 states and Washington, D.C., with just over 3,500 members residing in Maryland. The construction and development of a high-speed maglev train system would generate thousands of good jobs for carpenters, construction workers, and other trades, while the system long-term maintenance and operation will provide sustained employment opportunities for years to come. House Bill 48 not only jeopardizes the immediate labor opportunities tied to the maglev, but also sets a precedent that could hinder future infrastructure investments. Large-scale transportation projects often require combination authority to streamline acquisitions and ensure timely completion. By restricting the ability to effectively acquire land, this bill sends a clear message that Maryland is unwilling to invest in the kinds of transformative infrastructure projects that directly benefit workers and drive economic growth. On the behalf of the Eastern Atlantic States Regional Council of Carpenters, we respectfully ask for an unfavorable vote on House Bill 48 and ask you to reconsider bills like this, one that would severely impact the ability of the maglev project to succeed. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you so much. We're going to take a question by Delegate Healy, and then we'll move on to the next two, unfavorable in person and the virtual witness. Delegate Healy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I wanted to speak to the lady from Prince George's County. And I appreciate you being here and stating your opinion. But I wanted to ask you, do you know, are there any stops for this proposed maglev train in Prince George's County?
There are no stops from DC to Baltimore. It's more, it's not a local, if you will, commuter transportation vehicle. It is underground. It is more of a regional approach to bring economic growth here in the state. So are there any stops in Prince George's County? The answer to that is no. It runs from DC to Baltimore.
What it would cost to ride on this vehicle?
That has not yet been established.
Okay, so if somebody who lived along the alignment, if this were built, and they lived in Prince George's County, and their house was above the tunnel, and they had to deal with the rumbling and the noise and the vibrations and the worry, and they would have to drive into Washington, D.C. if they wanted to actually ride on it. Isn't that true?
If I could address a couple of questions that you posed within that statement. The answer to that is yes. They would either need to go to D.C. or to Baltimore. In terms of rumbling or houses being moved, I'm sure you know people who live where the metro runs under their house. This is below the metro. Our studies show, engineering studies show, that there's no rumbling of houses, there's no disruption, and certainly would love to be able to submit any additional detailed information as it is a concern of any disruption to any infrastructure as it concerns a homeowner such as myself and all of you here on this committee.
I thank you for your testimony, and we have many of my constituents who live along the alignment in Beacon Heights and in the Greenbelt area.
Yes.
Are very concerned, and rightly so. They have put their life savings into their homes.
Certainly.
And many have lived through the development of Metro and have seen buses falling into the tunnels during the construction period and all kinds of other things that happen when tunnels are built. So you understand that the people who live along the alignment have a stake in this as well?
Absolutely, and all of their concerns should be addressed.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Appreciate you for your service. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other questions, I'm going to call up the last couple of on the panel. Unfavorable, Anwar Young and Reverend Kobe Little. Good to see both you gentlemen in committee.
See you, Madam Chair.
You may proceed when you're ready.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, esteemed members of this committee. My name is Anwar Young. I'm here today in my capacity as a concerned citizen and a resident of Baltimore City. House Bill 48 creates an unfair and arbitrary distinction between maglev and other rail technologies, undermining Maryland's ability to embrace innovative, sustainable, and job-creating infrastructure projects. Under current law, traditional railroads are granted condemnation authority to acquire necessary land for public transportation infrastructure. House Bill 48 singles out maglev technology by stripping it of the same authority, despite maglev being an advanced, high-speed rail solution with proven economic and environmental benefits. This policy lacks any sound justification and needlessly impedes progress. The SE maglev project, which this bill directly impacts, is projected to generate more than 160,000 jobs in Maryland, spanning construction, engineering, and operations, ensuring historically disadvantaged communities benefit from this infrastructure investment. There is also a commitment of $4 billion to go to minority and women-owned businesses. Maglev technology operates on a zero-emission model, reducing greenhouse gas emissions comparable to cars, buses, and airplanes. Maglev can ease traffic congestion, improve air quality. Blocking this project would contradict Maryland's climate goals and force continued reliance on carbon-intensive transportation. Maryland residents deserve a fair and transparent process to assess the benefits of high-speed rail. This bill prevents communities from evaluating the available information in future environmental studies, eliminating their ability to make an informed decision about the future of high-speed rail. House Bill 48 is anti-competitive, anti-innovation, and anti-growth. It creates arbitrary legal obstacles threatening economic and environmental progress and denies communities the opportunity to assess the benefits.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Young. Mr. Little.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Delegate Healy. I'm Reverend Kobe Little. I'm here today in my capacity as a citizen and an environmental justice advocate. The issue with this, let me just say this before the clock runs out. Thank you to this committee, and please convey, Madam Chair, my thanks to the Speaker for upgrading the AV systems to include closed captioning. Delegate Healy, I know that this legislation is well-intended. Your goal is to protect your constituents. And I think while you approach this from a place of good, this is the wrong approach. Essentially, what this legislation would do is single out one industry, one technology, one company, without any real justification, in favor of an inefficient, centuries-old technology that doesn't produce the results that we need. This committee has already heard legislation today about the value of transit-driven development. The Maglev project would be a tremendous transit-driven development project, which would make employment and markets 200 miles away from here accessible to people who live in Maryland. I understand the concerns about eminent domain, and I completely agree with the robber baron origins of eminent domain. But in the 100+ years since the robber barons of old had their sway, we have built-in protections in our laws. So all of the eminent domain laws have a process that require fair compensation, that require legal oversight.
Mr. Kobe, thank you for your testimony. You are out of time. I'm sorry. Does anyone have any? Seeing none, we have one more unfavorable testimony virtually. It is Jose Suero. Okay. You may begin when you're ready. Can you hear us, sir?
Hello?
Hello, can you hear us?
Yes.
Please go ahead and begin.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the Environmental and Transportation Committee. My name is Jose Suero, and I'm the Executive Director of the Metro DC Hispanic Contractors Association, here to testify in opposition to House Bill 48. We are an organization that has a network of over 8,000 small businesses, general contractors, government officials, and other professionals in the field in the Washington metropolitan area. As an organization dedicated to empowering Hispanic contractors and advancing equitable opportunities for minority-owned businesses, We believe that passage of House Bill 48 prohibits the business's it prohibits the ability for the maglev project to actualize, thereby eliminating significant economic and professional opportunities for the small business community, while also hindering Maryland's progress towards innovative transportation solutions. We support the maglev project for 3 overall reasons. It will provide economic opportunities for minority-owned businesses. It will strengthen Maryland's infrastructure and economy. And lastly, for the environmental benefits it will provide. This project will create thousands of jobs, specifically for MBEs and WBEs. In fact, Baltimore-Washington Rapid Rail has committed to a $4 billion pledge to MBEs and WBEs. This includes opportunities for both subcontractors and workforce development. Large-scale infrastructure projects rely heavily on subcontractors. Hispanic contractors in Maryland could be well positioned to secure these contracts, fostering economic growth within our communities. This project would modernize infrastructure in the Maryland, D.C. region, making it a leader in clean, safe, high-speed transportation. This would enhance connectivity between economic hubs, reduce travel times, and increase
Mr. Suero,
the region's
thank you for your
competitiveness
testimony.
on a national scale. The ripple effects of such a project.
Thank you
would
for your
extend to
testimony.
small businesses and service providers and local.
Thank you for your testimony. 2 minutes is up. I'm sorry. Thank you so much for your testimony. Is there any questions? Seeing none, that ends the bill hearing for HB 48. Calling up now HB 191. Delegate Foley, Vehicles Laws, Towed, Remove, or Abandoned Vehicles, Electronic Notice to Owner. Do you have a panel, Delegate?
Yes, can I call my
Yes, please.
Andrew Mansfield and Charles Barrett. Okay, don't press the mic and make sure you talk into the mic. Hello. Thank you. May I begin? Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair and Chair Corman, and members of the House Environment and Transportation Committee. I am, for the record, Delegate Linda Foley, and I'm presenting HB 191, Vehicle Laws, Towed, Removed, or Abandoned Vehicles, Electronic Notice to the Owner. I'm presenting this on behalf of the Towing and Recovering Professionals of Maryland and other advocates. And let me just say, this is another towing notification bill, but this is one that, whereas in the past, they've dealt with police-initiated towing for the most part, this one is a little more broad, and I hope you'll really like it, and I would urge your support. HB 191 is intended to streamline processes and ensure the quick resolution of situations where a vehicle is not claimed when towed. Similar legislation has been voted favorably by this committee over the past 2 years, authorizing the electronic notification of secured parties, lien holders, and insurers of records by towers and police departments, as I mentioned. This bill extends this process to the vehicle owner and provides additional protections. Under HB 191, the Motor Vehicle Administration, or the MVA, will be required to notify the vehicle owner using an email address if that email address has been provided and is on file at MVA, and requires mailed notification if the vehicle owner doesn't respond to that email within 7 days. HB 191 will improve communication between the administration and vehicle owners by expediting the notification process and reducing state expenses with regard to certified mail. TRPM, that's the Professional Towers Association, worked with MVA during the interim on this process. Representatives of TRPM are here in support today, and you'll hear from them and can respond more specifically to questions about this bill and the current process. I just want to add that this does not violate the privacy of the emails collected by MVA, because MVA will be doing the notification. And the emails are supplied to MVA by the vehicle owners themselves on a voluntary basis. Thank you for your consideration, and please issue a favorable report on HB 191.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, members of the committee, Andrea Mansfield, representing the Towing and Recovery Professionals Association of Maryland. This is kind of, I know you're very familiar with the issue. This is our towing trifecta, maybe our last towing trifecta. I don't know. We'll see. I think so. But really want to thank Delegate Foley for introducing this legislation. And I think really she covered all of the points with the bill. The main intent is we're trying to improve the process, make it more efficient, and actually get these vehicles dealt with and out of the tow yards and so forth as quickly as possible. As she indicated, we did talk with MVA, which is why this is kind of the third piece of this, because we really wanted to work out a process that was workable for MVA as well as the towers. And as Delegate Foley indicated, that is why they have agreed to make that notification. They were very clear that when they were authorized to begin collecting emails from individuals, that they said they would have, that they would be secure, they would be private and not shared, but they are able to work a system and a process that will allow them to make that notification. And you do have a letter of information you should have in your folder, as you should, indicating that they are very willing to do that. You also have a letter in your file from the police chiefs and the sheriffs. They are also very supportive of this process to make it more efficient for their use as well. With that, we would encourage a favorable report. But thank you.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair and Vice Chair and Committee, Charlie Parrish, Legislative Chairman for Towing and Recovery Professionals of Maryland, as well as a small business owner in the Baltimore region for towing. I want to thank Delegate Foley. 3 years ago we came, first starting with notification because of the mailing system. It was taking 9 months to get mails back. We had insurance companies, lien holders. The mail just wasn't going through. So we got that passed. Then we went with the insurance companies. We worked that out. This was the hardest, and that's why we saved it for last. And it came to me. I got an email on my phone from MVA that my vehicle was due for an emissions inspection. 10 days later, I got the letter in the mail. And I'm like, well, if they can do that, what if we give an impound? That individual gets it. It saves them storage money. Contrary to the belief, towers don't want those cars in their lots. It takes up space. Right now, I have over 270 some cars in 2 of my locations. I don't want their cars. I want them to have their cars. The problem is when we do these certified letters in the regular mailing, a lot of people won't sign for them. They'll ignore them. They'll think it's something bad. Or they come back months later, and in the meantime, that daily storage is adding up. So it's a win-win for both. And I ask that you give a favorable report and sign this bill as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions on this bill? Delegate Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Delegate Foley, for your continued work around towing. I'm looking at the bill, and I'm not understanding what the purpose of this electronic notice is. All I see is that, unless I'm missing something else, it's around when the towing business is closed and someone maybe can't go get their car. What is the purpose of the electronic notice?
Yeah, I'm going to ask Mr. Parrish. I'm going to ask Mr. Parrish to answer that.
Yeah.
What happens is when we get a vehicle under the rules right now, by the 7th day, we have to send a certified letter along with a regular registered letter to the 3 individuals, if it's 3 involved in it, the lien holder, the insurance company, and the registered owner.
Right.
By the 3rd day, we're finding out who it is and then sending that letter out. At least I am. I don't wait till the 7th. I want to get that car out. The electronic notification, what that does is what I can do now is immediately when that car is impounded, that next day, I'm now sending MVA that information. They're then emailing if that person agreed to give their email address. MVA is letting them know, hey, Charlie Parrish has your car. It's been impounded. This is the address. Please contact them at this number. If I don't get a response from MVA that they've accepted that email, I'm still mailing out the letter by the 7th day. So what this is doing is just speeding up notification to the individual who owns the vehicle.
Yeah. So I think Delegate Lehman, what happens is, when a car gets towed, it gets towed to an impound lot, often owned by the tower.
and by the towing company, almost always owned by the towing company, and that's where it is. So if you need to recover your car, you might not know where it is, right? You might not know who towed it. You might not know where it is. And so what this, as Mr. Parrish was saying, is this allows a notification to the vehicle owner that their car is in the lot. And that they should come get it.
Okay, but after the 7th day or right away, or both? Because you were saying after the 7th day, you are required to send mail, snail mail.
No, if MVA doesn't let us know that the individual, let's say they sent you an email, and let's just say for whatever reason you didn't respond.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't respond by that 7th day, I still have to follow the certified mail and the registered mail procedure. But if you do respond, and hopefully you come and get the car, I don't have to send that mail out.
Right.
So it's in addition to the mail, really. So if the vehicle owner doesn't respond to the email, which is possible, right? I mean, I get a lot of emails that I don't respond to. If the vehicle owner doesn't respond to the email from MVA, then the tower is required to send the registered letter anyway, as they would have without the electronic notification.
Okay, but so what about for people for whom MVA has no email? How does the system work?
Then
it doesn't come into play. Any out-of-state tags, rental car companies, they're still going to get a registered certified mail letter sent because there's no email on file.
Okay, one last question, Mr. Chair. But before that, as soon as you've got my car, do you not have to call me or do something sooner than an email or a?
Not you. Within 1 hour, we have to know.
Problematic. Yeah, I didn't know that was the law.
No, I wish I could. No, within 1 hour, we have to call. Within 1 hour of taking possession, even before it gets to the lot. Within 1 hour of taking a possession of vehicle, whether it's a repo, an accident, or a trespassing impound, we have to notify the jurisdictional police in that where we took it from and give them all the vehicle information and everything else.
The police, but not the owner.
We don't know who the owner is yet.
Okay. Well, I'd like to talk to you and Delegate Foley offline. I'm dealing with a very bad actor in my district, a towing company, and I will talk to you offline about my concerns about this. Thank you.
Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Delegate Lehman has kind of answered some of my questions, but I just want one for a point of clarification. So I have a cousin that's in the towing industry. He's a towing industry professional. He raised a point to me with this, and I just want to understand. So if we have a wrong email address and it's sent incorrectly to someone, that's on the MVA, right? Or what? There's no liability to the tower or the towing industry in this case, right? If that were to occur, if some information is delivered wrongly that way?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And again, if the towing company doesn't get a response within 7 days, like in the case of a wrong email, then it's on the towing company to send the registered mail.
We still have to follow the same procedures.
Yeah, same procedures.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you. There was a virtual witness, but they are not here. So that concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 191. We will turn to House Bill 178, Delegate Guyton, Vehicle Law, Stopping, Standing, or Parking in a Bike Lane or Bicycle Path Prohibition. And if you have a panel, feel free to bring them up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All right. Yes, if my panel wants to join me up here. Good late afternoon to Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, my wonderful colleague, distinct colleagues on ENT, and Delegate Naraki. Delegate Michelle Guyton, District, I'll let it sink in, it's late. Delegate Naraki, excuse me. Can I have a mulligan? All right, do-over. I am Delegate Michelle Guyton, District 42B in Baltimore County, and I'm going to make this really quick for y'all because it has been a very long day, as you can see. I am asking for your support and a favorable report on House Bill 178, simply protects bicyclists by prohibiting stopping, standing, or parking in a bike lane or bicycle path. So the legislation is important to us in lots of ways. It supports Vision Zero. It supports our Complete Streets commitments. It changes driver behavior to help ensure that everyone gets home safely. And it also encourages no emission transportation and improves the health of our citizens. All of those in one little change. So this legislation also puts the state of Maryland in line with Baltimore City has these provisions already in place, Washington, D.C., and Virginia. So you will note that there are a couple letters and testimonies favorable with amendments. I have worked with Federation of the Blind and MDOT to address their concerns, and the amendments that you should have in front of you, because they were submitted to the council here in ENT, will lower that fiscal note that you're seeing from MDOT. That is the reason for changing, making those changes. They were under the impression that they would have to change all of their signs all over the state. We reworded it so that they feel like they no longer have to do that. So there are some concerns that the trucking industry has, and I know that you will hear them as well. My only question that I hope they will answer is that in these other areas that have already made this change in law, how are they dealing with the concerns that they bring to you today? And I think they're managing. So thank you so much for your time, and I'll turn it over to my panel.
Thank you, Delegate Guyton. Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce. I am Seth Grimes with the Washington Area Bicyclist Association, which supports HB 178. I have 4 points. This is a safety measure. This is a very straightforward addition to Maryland Code. This is well precedented, and state code already provides necessary exemptions. So I'll just elaborate a bit to say safety measure. When a bicycle lane is blocked or obstructed, bicyclists are forced into traffic lanes where they are less safe and where they also impede potentially vehicle traffic. So this is favorable for not impeding vehicle traffic. As written, noting the amendment, as written, this is a one-line addition to Maryland Transportation Code that mirrors 10 existing provisions that state a person may not stop, stand, or park a vehicle. These all are intended to ensure pedestrian and safe vehicular passage. This law, as Delegate Guyton mentioned, is very similar to laws in Baltimore, in the state of Virginia, in Washington, D.C., also in states including Florida, of all states. So the precedents are there. The Virginia law simply states, quoting, parking, stopping, or standing is prohibited on any bridge or in any tunnel and on any sidewalk, bicycle lane, or shared use path unless otherwise indicated by the department, without further conditions. Indicated by the department. I had Will Pines, the state highway administrator, phone me Friday 2 weeks ago to talk about this bill, and we discussed the kind of exemptions necessary that Delegate Guyton mentioned. I'll just mention that Maryland Transportation Article 21106 provides an exemption already from stopping, standing, parking prohibitions for emergency vehicles, fire alarms, medical emergencies, and Transportation Article 21-1003. These prohibitions would, quote, apply, quote, except as necessary to avoid conflict with other traffic or in compliance with law or directions of a police officer or traffic control device. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. Please give this a favorable report.
Good afternoon. Jed Weeks, again, the Executive Director of Bikemore, asking the committee to vote favorably on HB 178. In Baltimore City, as noted, it's already illegal to stop, stand, or park in a bike lane or bike path. And Seth mentioned that the exemptions that are sort of required to make these things function are already in place in state law. We believe this law is working in Baltimore City without any further exemptions. It is a challenge in a compact city. There's always competing curbside interests on our roadways, but we really encourage design solutions for these competing interests. So ensuring when you're putting in bike facilities that you include loading zones, mid-block ADA parking access, flex zones, and other treatments that manage delivery and access without adding further exemptions that could endanger vulnerable road users into code. As Seth noted, it's already illegal to stop, stand, or park everywhere else a vulnerable road user may be, at a bus stop, in a crosswalk, in an intersection, on a sidewalk. It just makes sense to make this consistent for bike lanes too. And so we're confident that, like Baltimore City, Maryland can enact this legislation as drafted and in combination with the adopted MDOT Complete Streets policy, design roads that are both safe for all road users and accommodating of other freight and mobility access needs. Thanks.
Joshua Feldmark from Bike Maryland. Sitting here in front of me for some reason is the proposed income tax changes, so I'm going to spend 2 minutes talking about that instead, if that's okay. No, I'm just kidding. Bike Maryland says us too.
And I believe we have one more in the panel. Yes, come on up.
For the record, John Corn, Bicycle Advocates for Annapolis and Anne Arundel County. Thank you for the bill. I'll say us double two. Thank you.
We love that. Delegate Foley, your question.
Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate Guyton, for bringing this bill and for the advocates for supporting it. I think it's an incredibly important for safety reasons, if nothing else. My question is, would this include, when you say that person may not stop, stand, or park a vehicle in a bike lane, would that include a scooter?
Do you want to take it?
You're talking about like an electric scooter?
Yeah, I'm talking about
a
like one of those
scooter
rental electric scooters, because people leave those everywhere, and I have seen them in bike lanes and on bike paths.
So at least with the rental scooters, there are already policies in place, so like in Baltimore City locally, that prohibit parking them in those locations. And again, generally we try to use like a design solution there. So in Baltimore City, we have a system that we're continuing to evolve, but it basically gives incentives and discounts for people to park them lawfully, and then essentially fines them or bans them from the rental apps if they park them unlawfully. So like blocking a curb cut in a bike lane in a parking spot or something.
That's
like that.
great for Baltimore City,
Yeah.
but my question is, would the bill cover that? And if not, would you consider putting in some language that maybe possibly would cover, people who dump those scooters in the bike lanes?
I would consider that. I believe that is already against the law. I believe the disabilities community a few years ago, but this is just from memory, actually worked on some legislation not to leave those scooters laying around where people in wheelchairs couldn't get through and where people who are visually impaired. But I will double check that. And if it's not, then yes, I'd be happy to work with you on that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I would just add to that scooters are considered bicycles in Maryland code unless otherwise specified. And we're all required to comply with Maryland rules of the road unless there's a specific exception. And so I would think leaving a bicycle or a scooter or any other type of mobility device in the bike lane would be a violation no different than a vehicle.
Okay, thank you.
See no other questions, I would at this time call up the favorable with amendments, Lou Campion, and then the next one is Ronza Offman virtually.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Louis Campion, Maryland Motor Truck Association. And we are here in support with amendments, and I appreciate the extensive back and forth exchanges and opportunities with the sponsor's office to talk about some of the concerns that we have. Because we are here appreciating the need to protect bike lanes. The challenge we have is that curbside delivery has been diminished significantly over the last several years, particularly as we've seen, bike lane expansion. And that was actually recognized back in 2017 by the Baltimore Regional Transportation Board, where they actually had a freight delivery symposium that dealt extensively with curbside delivery challenges. And, we're talking about deliveries where UPS or FedEx or Amazon are having to stop, and the width of either available curbside parking, if it exists, is not sufficient and does protrude out into potentially a bike lane. A great example of that is, I know we heard that Baltimore has a prohibition, is North Charles Street in Baltimore. You can bring it right up on Google Maps, and you'll see the bike lane, and you'll see curbside parking that is available, that is very narrow and insufficient for the width of a commercial motor vehicle. So, other incidents where this can happen, household goods movers. If you don't have a driveway, for example, at your home, and they have to be parked for an extensive period of time. Home heating fuel deliveries, those types of deliveries where you have to be within a certain distance. There are jurisdictions like New York City that have provided certain carve-outs for active loading or unloading, right? So we have offered an amendment. I appreciate consideration. I'm hoping that the subcommittee will look at that amendment, but it's really for limited windows of time, active loading or unloading. You have to display hazard warning lights, for example, just because our guys don't have a place to park to make those deliveries, particularly in more congested areas. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Lou. And we're going to, if you stay there, we're going to call up our next virtual witness, and that's Ronza Offman. You can begin when you're ready.
Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, and of course, Delegate Guyton, the sponsor. I'm grateful to be able to speak with you today, and I appreciate that our requested amendment is a friendly amendment to protect individuals with disabilities. I do not believe, and our organization does not believe, that a design solution is sufficient. We believe that the law needs to specifically have this carve out, and because Baltimore City is currently unsafe for us without that carve out. I myself have nearly died trying to cross to get to a vehicle loading or unloading me, to get to a bus where the supposed cross is supposed to be in the middle of the street, without me having to have to go all the way to the end of the block, cross at a corner, and come back where nobody else do, just so that I can get to my Uber or Lyft. I have recently had the bottom of my cane sheared off as I stand waiting for through traffic to stop so that I can get from across the bike lane. So you go across from the curb, across the bike lane, across a parking lane, across 2 moving rows of traffic, and then to the other curb where people can load and unload. As a result, it is increasingly and absolutely necessary that we are able to have those vehicles that are picking up individuals with disabilities come to the curb, even if that means in a bike lane. I think this can be done safely. It's in limited exceptions. Also, individuals with wheelchairs, there are folks in Baltimore City who are trying to get into a vehicle on the moving traffic side of a street because of where the bike lane is located. They are in moving traffic, and in some cases have either been hit, had their wheelchair hit, or nearly been hit. So a design solution is not working because law enforcement says people who are in the bike lane take priority. They don't know that there is supposedly ADA supports for this. Even when we file civil rights complaints with the city, those take months. And in one case, they adjudicated it in our favor, told us they were going to restripe the property to make sure that everybody knew that there was a loading area. It hasn't happened, and it's been a year. So please vote favorable, but only with the amendment. Again, I appreciate that Delegate Guyton is
Thank you so much.
friendly amendment.
Thank you so much, Ronza. Can I ask a clarifying question to your testimony? Sure. You mentioned, are you crossing at corners with apron cutouts to get from sidewalk to sidewalk when you're crossing a street, or are you crossing in the middle of a bike lane?
So you have to cross in the middle of a bike lane in order to get to where the loading zone and unloading zones have been set up on the other side of the street. So you're crossing a bike lane and you're crossing moving traffic as well, because you can only, when they put the bike lane
at sections where there is a crosswalk, correct?
Yes, it's a bike lane. They call it a bike lane crosswalk, but it's like not the corner, if that makes sense.
Yes, okay, thank you so much.
And I apologize, I don't know the exact vernacular of street design.
Oh, I don't either, you're quite fine. We'll make it up together.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, that ends the hearing for HB 178. Thank you all so much. At this time, subcommittees?
Oh, there we go. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just confirming yet again with the members of the Motor Vehicle and Transportation Subcommittee that we are not meeting today. We initially had a meeting scheduled this afternoon. We are not having that meeting. We will meet with our inaugural kickoff meeting next week at this time, 1 week from today.
Awesome. Anything else for the good of the order? Delegate Healy.
Yeah, the Local Government Committee Subcommittee will not meet today either, and we will announce next time when we will meet.
Any other announcements? See you all next week. We will not be here tomorrow. We are not having a voting session. See you later. See you